Chapter 652. Just as Zhao Yuzhen was about to play dirty tricks, Chao Kefi had already woken up. The beautiful woman groaned, her eyelashes trembling slightly. She opened her eyes and asked, "Where am I? Sister Chao, are you awake?" Lu Feier was overjoyed. She rushed to the bedside and stared at Chao Kefi with wide eyes. Chao Kefi looked at Lu Feier and tried to sit up with her hands. She forced a smile on her face and said, "It's you? What's wrong with me?" Lu Feier quickly helped her up and said quickly, "Oh, Sister Chao, you fainted when you were taking a bath. It was so dangerous. I thought you had a heart attack." Chao Kefi said blankly, "Ah? I had a heart attack again? No way, I took my medicine today." While she was talking, she heard a familiar boy's voice coming from beside her. "You didn't faint because of a heart attack." Chao Kefi turned her head and saw Li Yundong standing not far from the edge of the bed, his eyes fixed on her. Chao Kefi was surprised and happy. "What are you doing here?" Before Li Yundong could speak, Lu Feier said with a smile, "Sister Chao, if it weren't for Li Yundong, you would be in danger again. He saved you once again." "Hey, Sister Chao, you didn't see that Li Yundong almost demolished this building to save you? The hotel manager on duty came to apologize to us and asked us to change rooms. Hee, it was so funny. Hey, Sister Chao, I'm talking to you, Sister Chao." At first, Chao Kefi was still listening to Lu Feier, but gradually, her attention was focused on the boy in front of her. She suddenly had a feeling that every time she was in trouble or danger, the boy would appear. He was like a cloud, floating in the distant sky. At the beginning, he could still touch him, but slowly, he floated higher and higher, becoming more and more untouchable. Chao Kefi saw the concern, worry, and even a trace of hidden vigilance in Li Yundong's eyes, especially when she saw him standing 2 steps away from the bed and not approaching. Although she didn't know why Li Yundong was guarding against her, Chao Kefi, who was good at observing people's words and expressions, felt her heart ache. The joy of seeing Li Yundong couldn't help but dilute a lot. She reluctantly smiled at Li Yundong and said, "I'm sorry to have caused you trouble again." Li Yundong shook his head and said with a smile, "Don't mention it." Lu Feier raised her head and suddenly asked curiously, "By the way, Li Yundong, I haven't asked you yet. Why are you here?" Li Yundong chuckled, "I can predict the future. I felt that something bad might happen to President Chao, so I rushed here." Lu Feier covered her mouth and exclaimed, "Is it that exaggerated? Are you really a half-immortal?" Chao Kefi looked at Li Yundong with a complicated look in her eyes and said faintly, "He is not a half-immortal. He is obviously a full immortal, a transcendent immortal. When he is in a good mood, he will come down to the world to meet us mortals. When he is in a bad mood, he will be free and unfettered." Lu Feier could hear the strong resentment in Chao Kefi's tone. She secretly stuck out her tongue and didn't dare to answer. Instead, she looked at Li Yundong with some schadenfreude, wanting to see how he would deal with it. Li Yundong smiled bitterly. He didn't answer Chao Kefi's words. Instead, he changed the topic and asked, "How are you feeling now? What's wrong with you?" Seeing that Li Yundong didn't answer her, Chao Kefi felt even more bitter in her heart. She couldn't help but say angrily, "I'm fine. Go back to your immortal world. The human world is very dangerous. It's not safe for you to stay here." Li Yundong smiled and said, "How do you know that the immortal world is safer than the human world?" Chao Kefi glared at Li Yundong and said, "If that's not the case, why are you so far away from me? Can I eat you?" From the moment Chao Kefi woke up, Li Yundong had been carefully observing her. He wanted to see whether she was Chao Kefi or the mystical silver fox. But after observing for a long time, Li Yundong found that Chao Kefi's words and deeds, voice and smile were no different from before. It didn't seem that her soul had been taken away by her at all. Li Yundong couldn't help but be surprised. He knew that if the mystical silver fox had already entered Chao Kefi's body and snatched her soul, then the one who was speaking at this time should be the mystical silver fox's disguise. But no matter how similar a person's disguise was, it was impossible for her to speak in the same tone and expression. Besides, the mystical silver fox had been sealed for nearly 1,000 years. How could she disguise herself as a modern person as soon as she came out? Could it be that the mystical silver fox didn't possess President Chow? Li Yundong thought to himself. He took a step forward with a smile and said to Chow Kefi, President Chow, you really like to joke. I've booked a room near your room. If you feel uncomfortable or have something to do, just call me. I'll be right there. As he said this, he fled like he was running away. Chow Kefi looked at his fleeing figure. She was so angry that she picked up the pillow beside the bed and threw it at the door. Don't come. Go about your business. You're so annoying. Lu Feier looked at Chow Kefi with a strange expression and said with a smile, I used to look forward to the stars and the moon. But now, you want to drive me away. Sister Chow, be careful. If he really leaves later, I'll see where you can cry. Chow Kefi reached out to pinch Lu Feier's waist and said angrily, It's none of my business where he likes to go. Who is he to me? Why should I worry about it? There are so many women around him, and it's not my turn to worry about it. Lu Feier was pinched by Chow Kefi and begged for mercy. She giggled and said, Good sister, stop it. It's so itchy. Yes, you can't worry about it. But it's not that you don't want to worry about it. You want to, but you don't have the strength. Chow Kefi was furious. You damn girl, if I don't beat you for 3 days, you'll go to the roof and tear the tiles, won't you? After that, she pounced on Lu Feier. Lu Feier was shocked. She quickly raised her hands and shouted with a smile, Sister Chow, you've just recovered from a serious illness. Be careful of your body. Don't make trouble. Chow Kefi stopped and glared at Lu Feier. What do you mean by just recovering from a serious illness? I don't think I'm sick. On the contrary, I think I'm in good health. I've never been so good. Lu Feier knew that Chow Kefi's 9-in white bone claw was powerful. And she also knew that she couldn't do strenuous exercise, let alone get emotional. So she didn't dare to provoke her again. She said carefully, Sister Chow, don't force yourself. If you really feel uncomfortable, tell me quickly while your little enemy is still here. Otherwise, when our crew finishes filming, he will really disappear again. Chow Kefi said casually, Humph, who cares about him? He has no conscience. He treats me as. But soon Chow Kefi came to her senses. Her eyes widened and she said, What? What do you mean by when our crew finishes filming, he will disappear again? Lu Feier said with a proud look, Hey Sister Chow, you don't know, do you? When you were in a coma, Zhao Yuzhen came again. As a result, this guy was scared away as soon as he saw Li Jiandong. I saw that your little enemy was more useful than a door god. So I asked him to come to our crew to help us block this kind of evil spirit. Haha, am I very smart? When Chow Kefi heard this, she couldn't help but be overjoyed. But as soon as she raised her eyebrows, her face immediately fell again. She said in a hypocritical manner, Humph, what's there to block? You always playing these useless little tricks. Are you going to pay for the hiring fee or me? The crew is so short of funds now. Where can I find the money? Lu Feier saw that the corners of Chow Kefi's eyes were full of uncontrollable joy. But her words were very stubborn. She giggled and said, Do you still have to pay for ordering your little enemy? It's okay. Just order him around. I promise it'll be fine. In the future, if there's any physical work in the crew, I'll give it all to him. Chow Kefi suddenly frowned and said, Have you taken the wrong medicine? Are you ordering him around like a laborer? Lu Feier immediately giggled and fell onto the bed. The fox's tail is exposed, but you're still so stubborn. I think you're more worried about her than anyone else. After Lu Feier finished speaking, she jumped up and hid to one side, for fear that Chow Kefi would come and torture her later. But when she saw that Chow Kefi was angry, her first reaction was to touch her back with her hand, as if to see if her fox's tail was exposed. Lu Feier immediately laughed and said, Don't worry, I'm just teasing you. The fox's tail is not exposed. Chow Kefi was stunned, and soon she pounced on her with shame and anger. You wicked girl, if I don't teach you a lesson today, you won't know who I am. Lu Feier let out a cry of alarm, and hurriedly ran away, playing hide-and-seek with Chow Kefi in the room. The two of them laughed and joked for a while, and soon the previous storm calmed down. The next day, Lu Feier woke up in a daze and looked at the time. She suddenly jumped up from the bed and shouted, Oh, it's over. I'm going to be late. The director is going to scold me again. She was about to wake Chow Kefi up, but she saw that Chow Kefi's bed was empty. She rushed to the bathroom, only to see that Chow Kefi had already put on her clothes and was drawing makeup in front of the mirror. Lu Feier glanced over and saw that after Chow Kefi's eyes were painted with eyeliner, the charming lines at the corners of her eyes were especially outlined, making her look extremely seductive. Especially her small and red lips were smeared with a layer of sparkling lip gloss, making her red lips look like a ripe cherry. Even a woman like herself couldn't help but want to take a bite. Chow Kefi was born beautiful, and her appearance was outstanding. It could be said that she was born beautiful. Usually, she never put on makeup, but today, she put on makeup for the first time. The effect of this beautiful woman's meticulous makeup was really very lethal. Even a great beauty like Lu Feier was stunned. She saw that Chow Kefi's skin was white and rosy, and there was a healthy ruddiness in her delicate snow-white skin, which was completely different from the sickly white skin in the past. This kind of ruddiness made Chow Kefi look particularly full of vitality. Her whole body looked gorgeous, and people couldn't look at her directly. Lu Feier couldn't help exclaiming, "Sister Chow, you're already beautiful enough. You don't need to put on makeup anymore. If you put on makeup again, are you going to let us live?" Chow Kefi turned around and smiled sweetly. "Am I beautiful?" Lu Feier nodded quickly like a chick pecking rice. "You're so beautiful that even ghosts and gods hate you. Stop putting on makeup. Otherwise, some mountain king will take a fancy to you and take you away to be his wife. You'll be crying all day long." Chow Kefi rolled her eyes at her. "Nonsense. Have you lost your consciousness from all the filming? Don't you know what era you're in?" Lu Feier hurriedly urged, "Stop talking. We're going to be late. Sister Chow, stop putting on makeup. You're already very beautiful. Our driver Lao Wang is a pervert. Do you want him to peek at you when he's driving and cause a car accident?" Chow Kefi raised her eyebrows. He'd better behave if he doesn't want to lose his job. Lu Feier pushed her out of the bathroom. "All right, you're domineering and glamorous, okay? Get out of the way. I still have to wash up." After a chaotic struggle for a while, they hurried downstairs. As soon as they got downstairs, Chow Kefi suddenly thought of something. "Oh, I'm afraid Li Yundong doesn't know what time we're going out, does he? No, I have to go back and tell him." Lu Feier was well aware of this. She giggled and said, "Didn't you want to drive him away yesterday? He left last night, as you wish." Chow Kefi's face turned pale. "What?" Lu Feier saw Chow Kefi's face change dramatically. She was afraid that Chow Kefi would have another heart attack. So she quickly pointed to the door of the hotel and said, "I lied to you. He arrived a long time ago." Chow Kefi looked over and saw Li Yundong and her company's Xiaoyu standing at the door, talking softly about something. Chow Kefi's heart finally fell back into her stomach. She angrily glared at Lu Feier and said, "You wicked girl, I'll remember this." Chow Kefi walked out of the elevator. Her amazing beauty immediately attracted the attention of almost everyone in the hall. At first glance, everyone's eyes were tightly attracted by her like magnets. There was only one thought echoing in their minds. How could there be such a stunning beauty in the world? Everyone was so shocked by Chow Kefi's beauty that they couldn't speak. For a moment, the hall was silent. Li Yundong, who was at the door, saw that the hall behind him was suddenly so quiet that one could hear a pin drop. He turned around in surprise, but he was also stunned. Even though Li Yundong was used to seeing stunning beauties like Su Chan, Zi Yuan and Zhou Qin, he was still shocked by Chow Kefi's breathtaking beauty. He watched Chow Kefi walk out of the hotel with his mouth agape. The reincarnated Wisdom King, who had beaten the #1 master of Japan and made him vomit blood and faint, was shocked by a beautiful woman who was so weak that he lost his ability to think in an instant. When Chow Kefi walked up to him and smiled at him with a sweet smile, Li Yundong's soul returned to his body. He looked at Chow Kefi in surprise. Just as he was about to speak, he saw Chow Kefi snorting at him like a child throwing a tantrum. Then she raised her chin high, like a general who had won a battle, and returned to the court. She got into the van that had been waiting at the door for a long time. Li Yundong looked at Lu Feier in confusion, pointed at Chow Kefi and said, "What's wrong with her?" Lu Feier pursed her lips and said with a smile, Why don't you ask her yourself? As she spoke, she also got into the car. Li Yundong looked at Xiaoyu strangely. What's wrong with her? Xiaoyu also shrugged her shoulders with a strange expression. I don't know. Li Yundong didn't know why. He shook his head and followed her into the van. Fortunately, the compartment of the car was quite spacious, and it was not crowded for 4 people to get in. Along the way, Chao Kefi deliberately didn't look at Li Yundong, pretending to be a lady. She smiled without showing her teeth and spoke quietly, which made Li Yundong more and more surprised. But when they were about to reach their destination, Chao Kefi suddenly received a phone call. At first, she could still answer the phone very quietly, but after saying a few words, her tone suddenly rose 2 octaves, and she said with surprise and anger, "What? Say it again." Li Yundong looked at Chao Kefi curiously, only to see that after hanging up the phone, her face was gloomy and her eyebrows were twisted together angrily. He asked, "What happened?" Chao Kefi scolded angrily. "Damn it, our second female lead is on strike. Well, I'll take a nap. Wake up, the Super 2 group is also full." Chapter 653. The second female lead went on strike? Li Yundong asked in confusion. Lu Feier was also surprised. No way. Is Keston crazy? She has no money, and she's still on strike? Isn't she afraid that we'll ask for compensation? Chao Kefi said angrily. How would I know? The director said that Justin was very uncooperative today. She was picky here and there. The director said a few words to her, and she put down the burden and said she quit. Lu Feier's eyes widened. Where did she get the confidence to say such a thing? Doesn't she want to stay in the China film and television circle? It's a big taboo to break the contract halfway. Who would dare to look for her in the future? Chao Kefi snorted coldly. Who knows what she's thinking? Li Yundong asked curiously. Don't you have any backup actors? Chao Kefi wanted to cry but had no tears. Do you think it's football or basketball? It's possible to find a backup during the early stage of a movie, but this is a TV series, and it's already started. Where can there be a backup? Although Justin has a bad temper, her requirements are still very in line with the requirements of the TV series. Moreover, her image and temperament are also very good, and her acting skills are also good. Even if she wants to find another actor, there's no place to find one. Lu Feier comforted her. Sister Chao, don't worry. You can call her quickly. Maybe there's still room for negotiation. Chao Kefi didn't say much. She picked up her mobile phone and dialed Justin's number. But as soon as she dialed, the other side of the phone said, Sorry, the number you dialed is turned off. Chao Kefi was furious. It seems that she has really made up her mind. Li Yundong didn't know the whole thing at all. But seeing that Chao Kefi was so angry, he advised. Anger hurts the liver. President Chao, pay attention to your health. Don't worry. Can a living person die from holding his urine? Lu Feier also said, Yes, Sister Chao, pay attention to your image. Only then did Chao Kefi realize that she had lost her composure. She forced a smile at Li Yundong, then turned her face and looked out of the window. Her eyebrows were full of gloom and worry. At this time, Xiaoyu whispered to Li Yundong, President Chao is in trouble this time. Li Yundong asked, What do you mean? Xiaoyu said softly, Mr. Chao, not only is the company's capital chain broken, but the operation of the crew is also in a deadlock in the early stage. Although Mr. Chao relied on Mr. Zhao's investment to revive the crew, Mr. Zhao is very cunning. He always gives money little by little, as if he wants to control Mr. Chao. The crew will come to a standstill at any time. I think Justin might have seen this situation and wanted to threaten President Chao with a strike in order to raise his salary. Li Yundong asked again, Mr. Chao can't pay me more? Xiaoyu shook her head. Not to mention a higher salary. She might not even be able to afford it now. Every time she shoots a film, she almost begs her grandfather to sue the government. It's fine if she earns money, but if the film loses money, she will be miserable. This time, Justin's strike will definitely extend the shooting period. The shooting period will also affect the time and effect of the movie to be released to the market. It will also increase the cost. The other investors will definitely be even more unhappy. When the time comes, there will be internal and external troubles. As she spoke, Xiaoyu shook her head with an expression of disbelief. Li Yundong pondered for a while, then turned to Chao Kefi and asked, "What are the requirements for the second female lead in this film?" Chao Kefi turned her face and said without hesitation, "This TV series is about exotic love. The second female lead is a foreign woman. She has to be beautiful and have an outstanding temperament. It's best to have the feeling of a lady from a noble family, reserved and sunny. In fact, the acting skills of this role are secondary, but the temperament and feeling are very important. We have tried many foreign actresses, but none of them have this kind of feeling. Although Justin's character is very bad, her acting skills are very solid. She looks like whatever she plays, so she was chosen at the beginning." After hearing this, Li Yundong pondered for a moment and nodded. "I see. I'll meet this Justin later." Chao Kefi looked at Li Yundong and asked tentatively, "Do you have a way?" Li Yundong smiled slightly. "Let's give it a try. Maybe it will work." Chao Kefi's heart skipped a beat. She had seen all kinds of incredible abilities of this boy, but she didn't dare to imagine that Li Yundong could help her settle such a trivial matter. Seeing the joy on Chao Kefi's face, Li Yundong said with a smile, "Don't be happy too early. I'm just trying. I may not succeed." The smile on Chao Kefi's face became much more sincere and peaceful. She said with a smile, "I'm very happy that you're willing to help. It doesn't matter whether it succeeds or not. You're right. There must be a way. There must be a way." Lu Feier also turned her face and said to Li Yundong with a smile, "If you can settle this matter, I'll make you my idol. How about it?" Li Yundong chuckled, cupped his hands and said, "I don't dare. If I don't dare, won't your fans kill me?" Lu Feier giggled and said, "It's not easy to be my idol. Think about it yourself." Li Yundong smiled and didn't answer her again. After driving for about 10 minutes, they arrived at the seaside studio. As soon as they entered the set, Li Yundong saw a short man talking to a woman with brown hair and blue eyes. As soon as the man saw Chao Kefi, he immediately came up to her and complained, "President Chao, you're finally here? Go and talk to her yourself. I can't communicate with her." Chao Kefi glanced at Justin, who was smoking a cigarette in a seductive manner not far away. She nodded and said, "Director Song, let me persuade her and see what she wants to do." As she spoke, she went up to him. Director Song looked at her figure and was a little stunned for a moment. He looked at Li Yundong next to him and was slightly stunned. He asked Lu Feier, "Who is this?" Lu Feier said with a smile, "This is President Chao's friend." Director Song said with a displeased expression, "Don't you know the rules? Irrelevant people are not allowed to enter the studio." Lu Feier said disapprovingly, "He's not an irrelevant person. He's very powerful. He's here to help us." Director Song had obviously been holding back his anger these days. He sneered at an inappropriate time and said, "Well, I'd like to see how he can help us." Li Yundong heard these words, but he was not angry. He just glanced at Director Song faintly, and then his eyes fell on Chao Kefi. He saw that Chao Kefi was talking to Justin in a low voice. Her humble appearance was like a little wife who had seen her evil parents-in-law. She was only short of pouring tea and apologizing. It made people think that Justin was the boss of the crew, not Chao Kefi. At first, Justin talked to Chao Kefi without saying a word. In the end, Chao Kefi said with a livid face, "It's absolutely impossible. Who instructed you to do this?" Justin didn't answer her. She just sneered, took a deep breath, sprayed a mouthful of smoke on Chao Kefi's face, and smiled proudly. Chao Kefi frowned and subconsciously took a step back. Lu Feier, who was beside her, was angry. She rushed up and said loudly in English, "Pay attention to your attitude." Justin looked at her contemptuously and replied tit for tat, "Pay attention to your words, little girl." Lu Feier was furious. Just as she was about to quarrel with her, Li Yundong came up and reached out to stop her. He smiled and said, "Don't worry, I'll talk to her." When Lu Feier saw him coming up, her face lit up with joy, and she obediently retreated to the side. Li Yundong looked at Justin, turned to Chao Kefi and said, "Did the negotiation break down?" Chow Kefi suppressed her anger and said in a low voice, "Her conditions are too harsh." Li Yundong asked, "What conditions?" Chow Kefi said, "She asked to increase the number of scenes of the second female lead, more than the first female lead. In short, she wants to replace Lu Feier as the first female lead." Li Yundong frowned and didn't say anything. At this time, Lu Feier suddenly whispered, "Sister Chow, I don't have any objections. If things can be settled." Chow Kefi shook her head and said, "It's not that simple. She also asked to double her current salary." This time Lu Feier didn't say anything. Justin's salary was not low to begin with. Now that it was doubled, the cost of the TV series would soar. Moreover, if she doubled it, what about the others? Once the wind blew, the consequences would be unimaginable. Li Yundong asked in a deep voice, "That's all?" Chow Kefi sneered and said, "More than that. She has a big appetite. She even asked for a share of 30% of the proceeds from the sale of the TV series in the future." Lu Feier said in shock, "She's really crazy. Anyone with a little IQ wouldn't make such a request. She's taking more than the investors. Who does she think she is? An Oscar-winning actress?" Chow Kefi sneered and didn't say a word. Li Yundong laughed and said, "I understand. President Chow, if you trust me, let me handle it, okay?" Chow Kefi hesitated for a moment. Just as she was about to speak, Director Song, who was next to her, came up and complained to Li Yundong. "Hey, who are you? You want to point fingers as soon as you come here? Don't you see that we are already in a mess here? Please look in the mirror and don't make trouble for them, okay?" Li Yundong didn't look at him. He looked straight at Chow Kefi and asked in a deep voice, "President Chow, you make your own decision." Chow Kefi fixed her eyes on Li Yundong, and her mind raced for a moment. She remembered that when she had first met Li Yundong, the boy in front of her was so young and shy. But now he had grown into a man of indomitable spirit. His broad shoulders could shelter him from the wind and rain. Chow Kefi looked at Li Yundong's gentle eyes. For some reason, her heart gradually calmed down. It was as if as long as this boy took action, he could settle anything. Chow Kefi nodded slightly and said softly, "Then I'll leave it to you." Director Song, who was standing to one side, had always had a good impression of Chow Kefi. When he saw that Chow Kefi was looking at Li Yundong ambiguously, he became more and more unhappy. In addition, the matter in front of him was even related to the life and death of the crew and Chow Kefi's company. He couldn't help but be anxious. "President Chow, are you serious? Even if you are in a hurry, you can't do this, can you?" Chow Kefi turned her head and shouted in a low voice, "I made the decision, and I am responsible for it. Shut up." Today Chow Kefi was very beautiful. When Director Song was shouted at by her, he suddenly felt a decisive momentum coming towards him, and he was forced to swallow what he wanted to say. After getting Chow Kefi's approval, Li Yundong turned to Lu Feier and said with a smile, "Help me translate." Before Lu Feier could speak, Director Song sneered, looking like he was watching the fun. He sneered in his heart and said, You have no hair on your mouth, so you can't do anything. This toy boy doesn't even know English. What can he do?" While he was sneering, the other staff in the studio noticed the situation here and gathered around to see how this young boy would deal with the crisis in front of him. Chapter 654. Li Yundong's words surprised Lu Feier very much. She didn't seem to dare to imagine that this handsome man, who was omnipotent in her mind, didn't know English. Lu Feier looked at Li Yundong curiously. "You don't speak English?" Li Yundong also asked curiously. "Why do Chinese people have to speak English?" Lu Feier was a little speechless by his question. Although she didn't think so in her heart, she still obediently followed Li Yundong to Justin. When Justin saw Li Yundong at a glance, her eyes subconsciously lit up, and she secretly praised him in her heart. What a handsome man! But for a woman of her age, money was the most important thing to her. In her eyes, Li Yundong was a good-looking but useless spearhead. It was not worth her energy at all. Even so, she didn't mind talking to such a handsome boy. Justin took the initiative to reach out to Li Yundong and asked with a smile in English, "Hi, what's your name?" Li Yundong also shook hands with her politely, but replied in Chinese, My name is Li Yundong. After Lu Feier translated, Justin frowned slightly and said to Lu Feier, tell him that he should learn English, and then talk to me. This is the etiquette a gentleman should have. After listening to Lu Feier's translation, Li Yundong smiled and said, then tell her that this is China. It's her who should learn to talk in Chinese. This is also what a woman who knows etiquette should do. When Lu Feier heard this, she secretly vented her anger in her heart. She beamed with joy and translated it to Justin. Justin's face darkened and she said in a rather unfriendly tone, I think you've probably made a mistake. Right now, I should be the one who has the right to speak in this place, not a little boy like you who comes from nowhere. I think you might be able to turn around and go back to your original school to learn English a little better. By the way, you can learn more social etiquette before you talk to me. There was no dirty word in Justin's words, but every word was full of sarcasm and mockery. Lu Feier was angry and worried when she heard this. She was afraid that Li Yundong would fly into a rage after she translated it. In Lu Feier's opinion, the most annoying thing about boys at Li Yundong's age was that they were still wet behind the ears. Li Yundong saw Lu Feier looking at him anxiously and hesitating to say something. He seemed to know what the beautiful star was worried about. He smiled gently and said, it's okay. Translate according to the original words. You have to be professional. Even if the other party swears, you can translate it. Hearing his words, Lu Feier translated them truthfully. After Li Yundong heard it, he was not angry at all. Instead, he smiled at Lu Feier and said, tell her that there are two choices in front of her now. First, she can continue to shoot honestly and take back her so-called big shot style and unreasonable demands. Second, she can pack up and get out of here immediately. After Yundong's words there the Yundong Li Yundong, and listen to Fei the director burst Fei Dong the people he yen don 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 li he Yundong is just say he is Li Lu Feier don't listen to him. This person is just making trouble. Justin is just taking the opportunity to ask for a higher price. She is also seeking money. I think we can still talk about it. Now we really can't afford to delay or toss around. Li Yundong glanced at the short director and didn't say anything. He looked at Chow Kefi as if asking, do you still insist on letting me make the decision? In the past, Chow Kefi had always been a woman who liked to deal with this kind of difficulty in a gentle way. Over the years, she had been good at playing tricks and was used to getting benefits from both sides. Suddenly, she was a little hesitant, but soon her eyes narrowed, and she gritted her teeth and nodded hard. Li Yundong smiled and nodded at her, then said to Lu Feier, it's okay. Translate it according to what I said. Lu Feier was also a master who wanted the world to be in chaos. She turned her face, and with an imposing manner, she translated Li Yundong's words with the swagger of her strength. Justin suddenly became furious. She glared at Lu Feier fiercely, and then at Li Yundong. She said angrily, I'd like to see where you can find another actor. After that, she picked up her small bag and was about to leave. The staff of the crew suddenly panicked. Director Song hurriedly shouted, Hey Xiaozhang Xiaolu, what are you waiting for? Stop her. Don't let her go. As Director Song spoke, he rushed to Li Yundong angrily and shouted, If you don't understand, don't make trouble. Who do you think you are? Pointing fingers here? Fire her, and you'll act. Do you know how long it took us to choose such an actor? Li Yundong looked at the roaring emperor in front of him with a smile on his face. He asked with a smile, Are you willing to be blackmailed by her like this? If she is satisfied, others will follow suit and make trouble? Greed is hard to fill. How much money can you have to fill it? How many plays did she shoot before? Just scrap it and reshoot it. At worst, I'll help you pay for it. These days, whoever had milk was a mother. As soon as he heard that Li Yundong was willing to pay for it, Director Song's voice suddenly lowered. He was stunned, but he still said angrily, Do you think I don't know? This is no longer a question of whether to scrap the previous part of her shooting. Where can we find another foreign actor with a good image and temperament in such a short time? Li Yundong smiled slightly. You want to find an actor? I have one ready. Director Song was surprised and doubtful. Where? Don't lie to me. Li Yundong smiled and said, It's okay. I'll go find one now. As he said this, he walked out of the studio. Seeing this, Lu Feier hurriedly said, "I'll go with you." Li Yundong didn't look back. He waved his hand and said, "No, I'll be back soon. Wait for me for a while." Lu Feier didn't want to listen. She chased after Li Yundong out of the studio, but as soon as she went out, Li Yundong was gone. She looked around in shock, only to see that there was no place to hide anyone, as if he had evaporated into thin air. Lu Feier was stunned for a long time before she turned around and returned to the studio. Her face was blank and she muttered in a low voice, "Is he really a god?" When she returned to the studio, she saw that the other staff members of the film crew were taking a soft approach to appease Justin. The British girl also seemed to want to see the actor that Li Yundong had found to replace her. She smoked with a mocking expression and watched all this coldly. At first, Director Song still had a glimmer of hope, but as time passed, he slowly couldn't sit still. He kept asking Chow Kefi about Li Yundong's identity and background. However, Chow Kefi didn't want Li Yundong to be involved too much, and she didn't want Li Yundong to worry too much about her. So she kept evading Director Song's words. She just said evasively, "He is a very complicated person. He will do what he says. You just need to know this. Don't worry." Lu Feier, who was standing to one side, also chimed in with a heartless expression. "That's right, Director Song. You're too worried. The person that Sister Chow and I invited back is a big shot." Director Song was a little relieved, but he muttered, "Big shot. How can there be so many big shots these days? Is there someone who is more important than me?" Lu Feier chuckled and ignored him. She turned her face and began to chat and laugh with Chow Kefi. A group of people waited in the studio board. This wait lasted for 2 hours. At first, Chow Kefi and Lu Feier were full of confidence, thinking that Li Yundong would come back soon. But as time passed, they also became a little flustered and weak. They didn't even whisper to each other. The two of them looked at each other, and Director Song paced back and forth anxiously, like an ant on a hot pan. Waiting like this, another half an hour passed, and Justin finally couldn't bear it anymore. She sneered, threw the cigarette in her hand on the ground, stepped on it with the tip of her high heels, and said in a sarcastic tone, "It seems that the savior hasn't appeared. You can continue to wait. I'll go first." With that, she was about to go out. Director Song's face changed and he quickly shouted, "Hey, don't go. Let's talk about it." As soon as he finished speaking, he heard a voice coming from outside the studio. "Let her go." As soon as everyone heard this voice, they were immediately overjoyed and cheered for no reason. They saw Li Yundong walking in with a blonde girl. This girl was wearing a sky blue school uniform. Her figure was graceful. Moreover, she was young and beautiful. Compared with her, it was like heaven and earth. She said in shock and anger, "You can't fire me. You don't have the right and power." At this time, Chow Kefi sneered and said, "Then do I have the right and power?" Justin looked at her angrily and said, "What right do you have to drive me out of the shooting team?" Chow Kefi sneered and said, "No reason, because I'm the producer. You can go back first, or you can make an appointment with your agent and lawyer in advance to wait for us at home. We'll contact you in a few days." After that, she turned her head and no longer looked at Justin. Her face was full of pride. The staff in the studio couldn't stand Justin's behavior for a long time. They laughed loudly and mocked Justin. Justin's pretty face turned red and white in a burst of ridicule. She gritted her teeth, turned her head and rushed out. Director Song laughed and said to Chow Kefi, "That's great. It's really satisfying. I don't like this bitch for a long time." Chow Kefi smiled slightly, turned to Li Yundong, and said, "Thank you so much." Li Yundong laughed and said, "It's nothing. You don't have to thank me." For a moment, everyone in the studio laughed and celebrated. Only Chris was shocked and angry. She grabbed Li Yundong and said loudly, "What on earth are you doing? I don't know how to act." Li Yundong winked at her and said in a low voice, "You don't know how to act? You can learn." Chris wanted to cry but had no tears. I came to China to learn cultivation, not to learn to act. If I want to learn to act, why don't I go to Hollywood? God, who can tell me what the hell is going on?" Chapter 655. Just as Li Yundong was involved in a small storm in the crew, Su Chan, Zi Yuan, and Zhou Qin were involved in a bigger storm in the Shen family in Tiannan City. After the three of them returned the Medicine King tripod intact, Shen Wankai, who had been knocked out in the conflict, and then frightened by the bad news, immediately jumped up from the hospital bed, as if he had come back to his senses. Shen Wankai looked at the Medicine King tripod that he had lost and regained. For a moment he burst into tears, but the Tianai auction house was even more excited than him. The manager of the auction house almost worshipped Su Chan, Zi Yuan and Zhou Qin, and wished he could offer them a longevity temple. If Su Chan, Zi Yuan, and Zhou Qin hadn't brought the Medicine King tripod back, the Tianai auction house couldn't imagine what kind of blow this incident would have caused to them. Who would dare to bid for their things in the future? Because the news that the Medicine King tripod had been sold at an amazing price spread all over the country in the first place. The news that the Medicine King tripod had been magically taken away immediately after the auction was even faster than this news. Stealing a work of art worth 700 million yuan in public was a big deal no matter where it was. This matter even alarmed the provincial party committee and the provincial government. Even Li Yuanbo and Zhou Kechang were alarmed, especially when Zhou Kechang knew that this matter also involved Li Yundong and his daughter. He even asked Li Yuanbo for help and transferred Director Zhong, who was the deputy director of the Provincial Public Security Department, to lead the team to set up the Medicine King tripod robbery investigation team, and personally asked about this matter. Therefore, when the Medicine King tripod was returned to Zhao intact, it immediately caused a sensation in Tiannan City. For a time, countless reporters swarmed there. Not only the reporters from the major TV stations in the province and the city, but even CCTV also sent a special team. For a time, the Shen Villa was very lively. Miss Zhou, may I ask who took the Medicine King tripod? How did you find the Medicine King tripod? Miss Zhou, I heard that you were also present when the Medicine King tripod was robbed. Can you describe the scene for us? Miss Zhou, may I ask where you found the Medicine King tripod? How did you get the Medicine King tripod from the robbers? Do you have any connection with the robbers? All kinds of questions flooded Zhou Qin like a tide. The reporters stretched out their arms and almost stuffed the microphones into her mouth. Su Chan, who was standing on the second floor of the villa and watching all this, patted her chest with lingering fear. That was close. Fortunately, I wasn't dealing with these reporters downstairs. Otherwise, I would have been swallowed alive by them. Zi Yuan stood next to Su Chan and said with a smile, I know that neither you nor I can handle it, so I asked Zhou Qin to go. Zi Yuan was very careful. She had expected such a situation before returning the Medicine King tripod. So she and Zhou Qin had long been prepared to deal with it. There was no better candidate than Zhou Qin in this situation. This socialite of the Zhou family seemed to be born for this kind of grand occasion. At this time Zhou Qin, who was downstairs, gave full play to her bearing as a daughter of a famous family. She dealt with every question flawlessly, especially when she heard a very malicious question from a reporter. She turned her head to look at the reporter and said, Miss, you can ask the public security officers involved in the investigation about your previous questions. I have told them everything I know. As for your last question, I would like to ask, why do you think we have any connection with the robbers? This reporter was a woman in her 30s. She was the ace reporter of the provincial TV station. She had always been known for her sharp and aggressive questions. She said bluntly, with all due respect, when the robbers stole the Medicine King tripod, it was the three of you who were present. And when the Medicine King tripod was returned, it was the three of you who were present. This can't help but make people's imagination run wild. Zhou Qin raised her eyebrows, and her eyebrows were full of heroic spirit. She said in a diplomatic language, You are reporter Wang of the provincial TV station, right? I know you. You are very famous. Reporter Wang smiled slightly and said, Thank you for your compliment, but please don't bypass my question. Zhou Qin smiled slightly and retorted sharply, I didn't bypass your question. I just think that your fame doesn't match your ability. It's a typical case of unworthy reputation. Because I think it would be better for you to be a detective or a movie screenwriter. You have a very rich imagination. If we have something to do with the robbers, why should we return the Medicine King tripod intact? Colleagues were enemies. When the reporters around saw the ace reporter of the provincial capital being defeated, they immediately let out a low roar of laughter. Reporter Wang was slightly annoyed, but she quickly said, "Isn't it? The whole thing looks like a self-directed farce. Or is it just a publicity stunt?" As soon as this was said, the reporters around whispered to each other and nodded secretly. This was also what they had guessed, but not everyone dared to make things clear so directly like reporter Wang. If one wanted to be a qualified reporter in China, it was absolutely impossible to be a good reporter without an excellent sense of desire and character. Almost every reporter present knew Zhou Qin's identity, and they also knew that the daughter of the Zhou family in front of them was not easy to deal with. There was no one like reporter Wang who dared to twist the tiger's whiskers. For a moment, everyone looked at Zhou Qin in unison, wanting to see how the eldest daughter of the Zhou family would deal with such a sharp and shrewd question. Zhou Qin was not as angry as everyone thought, nor did she speak ambiguously. She just smiled slightly and asked, "Using a work of art worth 700 million yuan to hype up?" The Medicine King tripod was sold at an astonishing price of 700 million yuan. This itself is a huge hype. Do you need to use a self-directed robbery to hype up? What if something goes wrong? Is it worth taking such a huge risk? Is it worth it? Reporter Wang, your imagination is incomparably rich, but your IQ is really a bit problematic. Reporter Wang had obviously practiced an iron face for a long time. As if she hadn't heard Zhou Qin's teasing, she quickly asked, "Miss Zhou, can you tell us in detail how you retrieved the Medicine King tripod?" Zhou Qin changed back to a diplomatic smile and tone. "You should ask the public security personnel in charge of this case. I have no comment." Reporter Wang was unwilling to give up and asked a series of questions. The other reporters were also unwilling to be left out. Once again, all kinds of questions were thrown at Zhou Qin like a storm. While Zhou Qin was dealing with them one by one, several young men suddenly squeezed into the crowd. The young man in the lead grabbed Zhou Qin and walked out without saying anything. Su Chan quickly grabbed Zi Yuan's arm and said, "Sister Zi Yuan, has Sister Zhou Qin been taken away? Should we save her?" Zi Yuan shook her head and said, "Don't be silly. With Zhou Qin's current strength, if she doesn't want to go, who can take her away? This must be an acquaintance of Zhou Qin's." Only then did Su Chan feel relieved. She suddenly smiled and said, "Yes, Sister Zi Yuan, you are so smart." The surrounding reporters rarely encountered such a beautiful and sharp-tongued interviewee as Zhou Qin. How could they let her go so easily? They all followed her out like a tide. The young man turned his head and pointed to Zi Yuan and Su Chan on the second floor, saying, "Go and interview them. They also know." These reporters turned their heads in unison and saw Su Chan and Zi Yuan looking at them in the corridor on the second floor. Their eyes lit up, and many reporters immediately turned around and rushed toward them. Su Chan was shocked. She quickly turned her head and hid in the room that Chen Wankai had prepared for them. Zi Yuan had a noble temperament and didn't like to have too much contact with secular people. She had always avoided this kind of scene as much as possible, so she naturally followed Su Chan and dodged quickly. Seeing that the two of them were hiding like frightened rabbits, these reporters had no choice but to turn back to look for Zhou Qin. However, when they saw Zhou Qin get into an Audi A6 and drive away, they could only look at the car and sigh. The person who brought Zhou Qin into the car was Secretary Liu, who had made a private deal with Li Jiandong before. After he sent Zhou Qin into the car, he got into the driver's seat and started driving. As soon as Zhou Qin got into the car, she saw a middle-aged man with a square face and a dignified appearance sitting in the back. It was her father, Zhou Kachang. Since the opening ceremony of Desanxian, although the relationship between Zhou Qin and her father was still a little stiff, it was not like before, like a life-and-death enemy. As soon as they met, sparks would fly in all directions. Zhou Qin nodded slightly and greeted him indifferently. "Dad." Zhou Kachang habitually took out a cigarette from his pocket and rubbed it with his hand. Before he could speak, Zhou Qin frowned and said, "Why can't you get rid of your old habits?" Zhou Kachang smiled and said, "I won't smoke. Can't I smell it?" Zhou Qin didn't comment and said lightly, "Why do you have time to come to me today?" Zhou Kachang put the cigarette between his nose and took a deep breath. He sighed and said, "You made such a big noise. How could I not come to you? Hey, 700 million, not 7 million, not 70 million. Humph, you're really capable. You didn't move for a long time. But when you moved, you made a mess for me. Do you know how big the impact of this matter is? The central government has been shaken. Do you know that?" Zhou Qin frowned secretly. "Is that necessary? 700 million is not enough to alarm the central government, is it? You officials spend more than this every day on eating, drinking, gambling, and wasting money, right?" Zhou Kachang was furious. He raised his eyebrows and said angrily, What nonsense are you talking about? How can you spout such nonsense?" Zhou Qin sneered and turned her head to one side, as if she disdained to say a few more words to her father, who was an official. Zhou Kachang took a deep breath, suppressed his anger, and said, "Yes, I know that you have embarked on a completely different path from me. You are very arrogant now. But don't forget that no matter how arrogant you are, you still have to roll in this turbid world. No matter how powerful the people in the cultivation world are, they can't jump out of the cage of the 3 realms and the 5 elements. No matter how capable you are, no matter how great you are, you still can't jump out of the cage of the 3 realms and the 5 elements. I am still your father." Although Zhou Qin's face was still cold, her heart trembled. She had grown up in the system, so she naturally knew how correct Zhou Kachang's words were. In the land of China, although many ordinary people did not like to talk about sex, the inheritance of the idea of official standards for 2,000 years had led to the ubiquitous official culture, and the power of officialdom was pervasive. Although cultivators were powerful and heaven-defying, if they offended the government, there were only a few paths waiting for them. They would be surrounded and suppressed by the government with the strength of the whole country, or they would be exiled abroad, or they would hide in the mountains and forests, or they would be destroyed, or they would directly ascend to become immortals and jump out of the cage. Apart from that, there was no other way. This was something that both Buddhist and Taoist cultivation sects had been proven countless times in the long history of China's 2,000 years of feudalism. During the Wei, Jin, and Southern and Northern dynasties, Emperor Taiwu of the Northern Wei dynasty and Emperor Wuzong of the Tang dynasty had launched a large-scale campaign to destroy Buddhism. At that time, the Buddhist cultivation sects occupied the absolute advantage in the cultivation world. But as soon as the imperial court gave the order, Buddhism was immediately swept away. All the major sects withered like fallen leaves in late autumn, which was tragic. When Zhou Qin was reading the history of the cultivation world, she clearly remembered that during the Wei, Jin, and Southern and Northern dynasties, Emperor Wu of the Northern Zhou dynasty had done something even more heinous. He had destroyed Buddhism twice and Taoism once. And the reason for destroying Taoism was simply incredible. During the Southern and Northern dynasties, although Emperor Wu of the Northern Zhou dynasty was a barbarian himself, he claimed that he was close to the Han and distant from the Hu. Buddhism was a foreign religion and also belonged to the Hu. In order to prove that he was close to the Han, Emperor Wu of the Northern Zhou dynasty declared that he was a devout Taoist believer and wanted to suppress Buddhism. However, it was impossible to suppress Buddhism by force, so Emperor Wu of the Northern Zhou dynasty organized a large-scale debate and a private battle with great fanfare. However, because the Buddhist cultivation sects had an absolute advantage in the cultivation world at that time, the Taoist cultivators suffered a crushing defeat in both the debate and the battle. Emperor Wu of the Northern Zhou dynasty, who believed in Taoism, was furious. He hated the rampant power of Buddhism and the Taoist cultivation sects for not doing their best. So in a rage, he simply shed all pretenses and announced to the whole country, "I will destroy both Buddhism and Taoism." As a result, the Buddhist and Taoist cultivators, who had been fighting fiercely, were beaten by the imperial court until they cried for their parents. It was a tragic sight. This was the case in the ancient era of cold weapons, let alone the era of hot weapons. If a cultivator was careless, an ordinary person could also kill him. Since ancient times, people had not fought with officials, and religious forces had not fought with imperial forces. This was a famous saying summed up by blood and tears. If the government really targeted them and decided to suppress them vigorously, the consequences would be unimaginable. Zhou Qin was secretly frightened. She turned her head and said to Zhou Keqiang with a serious face, "Does the higher-ups have any objections?" Zhou Keqiang snorted. "You also know how to be afraid. Aren't you the most fearless one?" Zhou Qin snorted coldly. "I'm afraid of implicating him." Zhou Keqiang said, "Hey, worry about yourself first. For a while keep quiet. The higher-ups have already noticed you. Don't be listed. And don't do anything out of line that can't be made up for. Otherwise, you can prepare to go abroad." Zhou Qin stopped talking. Her face was cold, and she didn't say a word for a long time. Secretary Liu, who was driving, took Zhou Qin and Zhou Keqiang around, and then parked the car near the Shen family's villa. After Zhou Qin got out of the car, Zhou Keqiang said at the moment when she was about to close the door, "Remember what I said. Keep a low profile, otherwise you know the consequences." Zhou Qin didn't say anything and got out of the car with a sullen face. After she got out of the car, she glanced around and suddenly saw Zhou Ping and Zhang Ling of the Jingyi school not far away. Zhou Ping saw Zhou Qin and the others looking at her, and then went into the villa. She turned her head and said to Zhang Ling, "Master, what should we do with the Medicine King tripod? Do we still have to fight for it?" Zhang Ling's eyes were fixed on the license plate number of Zhou Keqiang's car. She obviously recognized who the owner of the car was. This Shiji of the Jingyi school not only had a very high cultivation, but also had a very keen sense of smell. Her face was very ugly, and after a long time she said, "Don't think about it. The Medicine King tripod has made a little too much noise. It's not suitable for us to intervene anymore." Zhou Ping's eyes widened. "Then are we just going to let the Medicine King tripod fall into Li Jiandong's hands?" Zhang Ling snorted coldly. "It doesn't matter. In a while, it will be the inauguration ceremony of the leader of the Linggong sect. At that time, we will get back all of this." After that, she smiled coldly, turned around and shouted coldly, "Let's wait and see. Sorry, I went out today. It's late, and there will be another update later." Chapter 656. When Zhou Qin returned to the Shen family's villa, most of the reporters had already dispersed, and only a few reporters were still waiting. However, Shen Wankai was concerned about the rest of Su Chan, Zi Yuan, Zhou Qin, and the others, so he had announced that the Shen family's villa was no longer open to the public and asked all the reporters in the villa to leave. So Zhou Qin was free again. When Zhou Qin returned to her room and told Su Chan and Zi Yuan about the warning she had received from Zhou Keqiang, Zi Yuan and Su Chan both fell into silence. Although Su Chan was simple, she was also familiar with history. Naturally, she knew how terrible this warning was. She raised her head worriedly and said, "Sister Zi Yuan, how about? We'd better persuade Yundong not to take this Medicine King tripod. Now I feel that this Medicine King tripod is really a terrible hot potato. Whoever holds it is like holding a time bomb." Zi Yuan also frowned slightly. She thought for a while and shook her head. "Now it's not a matter of whether we want this Medicine King tripod or not, but we really should keep a low profile. Li Yundong has made such a big noise in Japan this time. In order to let him get away, we even alarmed all the famous TV stations in Japan. Even if the Japanese cultivation world controls the media through their own strength, there will be some news leaked out. I believe that the higher-ups will know something about it." Zhou Qin also sighed and said, "If it's just in our own country it's fine, but if it causes any international problems, it will be a big trouble." The three beautiful women looked at each other and smiled bitterly at the same time. The three of them should have been the most carefree little girls at this age, but because they had been involved in all kinds of storms and waves in the cultivation world. They had inadvertently stood on the top of the storm. It was easy to go up, but difficult to come down. Even a woman as intelligent as Zi Yuan couldn't think of a good way to deal with the predicament in front of her for a while. Compared with them, the rest of the Shen family seemed to be even more tired. In Shen Wansai's bedroom, Shen Wansai's second concubine, third concubine, fourth concubine Li Shaoxian, Shen Hui, and Shen Yu all gathered together, surrounding Shen Wankai as if they were forcing him to abdicate. This time, it was rare for everyone in the Shen family to work together to talk about the same thing. Aunt Zheng, the third concubine, wiped away her tears and cried to Shen Wankai, "Old master, even if you don't think about us, you have to think about Xiaowei and Xiaoyu. No matter how wrong they are and how naughty they are your flesh and blood after all. You can't destroy this family." The fourth concubine Li Shaoxian, who was usually at odds with him, also cried and said, "Old Shen, I know you are angry with me, but you can't be so reckless. 700 million yuan is not a small number. This money can be said to be the lifeblood of our Shen family." Shen Wankai sat at the desk and said impatiently, "Am I so poor that I can't even afford 700 million yuan?" It was true that for Shen Wankai, who had started from scratch and developed for decades, he was still a rich man. 700 million yuan was only a small part of his assets. However, it was not easy for a large family to take out 700 million yuan in one go. Moreover, although the Shen family's property was tens of billions of yuan, most of it was real estate, and the floating capital was only about 700 to 800 million yuan. 700 million yuan could be said to have emptied the Shen family's pocket. But for Shen Wansai's concubines and his children, Shen Wansai's move revealed a strong signal. Today he could spend 700 million yuan on a Medicine King tripod. But what about tomorrow? 1 billion? 2 billion the day after tomorrow? In this way, even Bill Gates couldn't stand such a toss. Most importantly, Shen Wankai spent 700 million yuan to buy this Medicine King tripod. Neither for collection nor for charity, but to give it to Li Yunyang. This was too much. He didn't even care about his relatives. If this could be tolerated, what could be tolerated? Shen Wansai's third wife and fourth wife were furious. When has Shen Wankai been so kind to me? He didn't hesitate to empty his pocket and spend 700 million yuan to please me? As a result, the third concubine and the fourth concubine, who were usually at odds with each other, immediately joined hands and were determined to persuade Shen Wankai to give up the Medicine King tripod no matter what. In order to persuade Shen Wankai, they even pulled in the second concubine and their children, who had never had their own opinions. The whole family went into battle together. Hearing Shen Wansai's words, the third concubine, Aunt Zheng said, "Old master, our family is very rich, but 700 million yuan is really not a small amount. If this money is taken out, our circulating capital will be empty. Even if we pay in installments, we can't afford it. If we encounter any difficulties during this period, the consequences will be unimaginable. Old master, you don't want the country you have fought for to be destroyed in one day, do you?" Aunt Zheng's words were so sincere that Shen Wankai immediately fell silent. For Shen Wankai, he had doubted this more than once. Is it worth spending 700 million yuan to be apprenticed? Moreover, looking at Li Jiandong, he doesn't look like a master who can be apprenticed with 700 million yuan. Did I do wrong or right in this matter? Especially during the period when the Medicine King tripod was lost, Shen Wansai's heart was in turmoil. But now the Medicine King tripod had been lost and recovered. Although he was excited, he had to face the problem that he had thought about over and over again. Seeing that Shen Wankai was silent, Li Shaoxian also tried to persuade him. "Old Shen, I won't say anything else. Let's talk about our current situation. It's not that you don't know that it's easy to fight for the country, but difficult to defend it. Now how many people are looking at us and want to take advantage of our weakness to pounce on us and bite us? Old Shen, think about it. Who doesn't know the news of buying the Medicine King tripod? Our enemies have been looking forward to us buying this Medicine King tripod for a long time. so that they can take the opportunity to attack us when we are short of funds. How much our company's stock price has been suppressed in the past 2 days? You don't know, do you? Shin Wansai's eyes narrowed. He raised his head and snorted coldly. If they want to suppress me in this aspect, they are too naive. Aunt Zheng, the third elder, persuaded again. Old master, you can't underestimate your opponents. Who knows if they have any huge funds hidden behind them? As she spoke, she quietly pulled Shin Hui's hand and motioned for her to give him some advice. Shin Hui was clever and very good at observing people's expressions. She thought for a moment and said, Old master, are you afraid that someone will say that you will go back on your word after bidding for the auction item? At that time, your credibility will be ruined? This sentence surprised Shin Wankai. He looked at Shin Hui in surprise. His favorite pearl in daily life really knew his mind best. What she said was one of Shin Wansai's concerns, and this concern was the most dignified one. Shin Hui's words made the people in the room light up in an instant. Li Xiaoxian, the fourth elder, quickly said, Yes, Xiaohui is right. Old Shen, if you are worried about this, you can rest assured. You are not the first one to break the contract. What are you afraid of? Aunt Zheng also said, That's right. The Medicine King tripod was not snatched from our hands. It was snatched from the hands of the auction house. Who knows if it was exchanged or not? This is not called breaking the contract. This is a matter of course. It's not our old master's fault, don't you think? Li Xiaoxian saw that Shen Wankai was silent, as if hesitating. She also saw that Shen Hui's previous words were quite popular, so she secretly stepped on Shin Yu's foot and said in a low voice, You also say something. Don't poke here like a piece of wood. Shin Yu seemed to wake up from a dream. He coughed dryly and said, Dad, in fact, I don't care if you buy this Medicine King tripod. After all, it's your money. You can buy whatever you want, right? But I just can't figure it out. Why did you give it to this Li Yundong? What on earth is he capable of receiving such a heavy gift? Even if he saved your life, Dad, you don't have to do this, do you? Shin Yu's words made the faces of Lao San and Lao Si change at the same time. Since you remember that your surname is Shun, then you should remember clearly that I am your father. What your father does is not up to you to tell me what to do. You want to take over my job? Wait until I'm dead. His roar was so loud that everyone in the villa could hear it clearly. The others in the bedroom were even more frightened. Li Xiaoxian boldly reached out to pull Shen Wansai's hand and said with a forced smile, Old Shen, don't be angry. It's not good to be angry. Shen Wankai suddenly shook off her hand and roared, Don't you just want me to die early? Get out, all of you. The third concubine glared at Shin Yu with hatred and winked at Shin Hui. The mother and daughter quickly went out of the door. The second concubine, Mrs. Ma, also sighed, softly recited a few Buddhist scriptures, and followed them out of the door. The fourth concubine, Li Xiaoxian, wiped her tears as she walked out. When she reached the door, she turned to Shin Yu, who had been beaten in a daze, and said, Let's go. Don't make your father unhappy. Shin Yu covered his cheek and looked at his father, as if he were a stranger. He suddenly got up and rushed out of the door like crazy. As soon as he rushed out of the door, he saw Su Chan, who had heard the noise not far away, looking at him curiously. With this look, Shin Yu suddenly felt that the place where his cheek had been slapped was even more painful. He instantly remembered the scene when he had pursued Su Chan in Shantang Dongwu City. At that time, he had been a rich young master. Wasn't it easy for him to pursue such a little girl? But now, his father had spent 700 million yuan to please this little girl's boyfriend. And his father had slapped him in the face in the presence of outsiders and scolded him loudly because of Li Jiandong. Was there anything more shameful than this in the world? In an instant, Shin Yu felt that Su Chan's eyes were full of sarcasm and mockery. He was ashamed and angry. With a shout, he rushed out like an injured beast. No matter how Li Xiaoxian shouted his name behind him, he did not look back. Shin Yu drove his car crazily to the bar he frequented on weekdays and drank crazily. Because he was dressed in famous brands and had the aura of a rich young master, he immediately attracted beautiful women. However, as soon as the beautiful woman sat down and tried to get close to him, Shin Yu roared at her. Get out of here! Who asked you to sit down? The beautiful woman was frightened by him and immediately ran away in a panic. But as soon as she left, another person sat down in her seat. Xinyu turned his head and was about to scold her when he saw a man in a camouflage vest smiling at him. "Young Master Shen, what are you so unhappy about?" As he spoke, 3 people came over and sat down separately. One of them laughed and said, "Do you still need to ask? It must be a woman." This man was the security guard of the Dongxing building Gongzi, who had once had a conflict with Li Yundong and several of his accomplices. They were half black and half white, and they were both black and white. They could be regarded as the #1 figure in Tianan City. Xinyu often hung out with some shady people, so the two sides had some friendship. As soon as Xinyu saw Gongzi, he didn't say any more evil words. He just drank the wine in silence. A security guard next to him knew that Xinyu was a real rich man. He was an idiot who spent money extravagantly. He laughed and said, "Young Master Shen, if you're in a bad mood, just say it. Which guy offended you? We'll help you vent your anger." Xinyu turned his head and looked at him. He suddenly thought of Li Yundong's background and Li Yundong's superhuman ability and strength. His face became even gloomier. He didn't say anything and drank even more fiercely. He was not a good drinker. After drinking a few glasses of wine, the smell of alcohol immediately went to his head, and he dared to shout some words that he didn't dare to say. Xinyu shouted drunkenly, "Su Chan, you be asterisk tch, little be asterisk th, what's wrong with me? Why don't I deserve you? Why do you like him and not me?" When the security guards heard this, they looked at each other. The security guard who had spoken before laughed and said, "Sure enough, it's a woman. Young Master Shen, don't worry. Isn't a woman like that?" Our Gongzi was also in a bad mood because of a woman the other day. Xinyu said loudly, She's different. I can't live without her." Gongzi glared at him, turned his head to Xinyu and said maliciously, "Young Master Shen, since you like her so much, then we'll help you think of a way to get rid of her. What do you think?" When Xinyu heard this, his eyes suddenly turned red. As the saying goes, alcohol strengthens the courage of a coward. Gongzi's words immediately made him more and more bold. Xinyu gritted his teeth and fiercely said a few words. "Well, I want to force myself on you. Well, today's update is very late. Sorry, but for the sake of the more than 9,000 words in the 2 chapters, please don't scold me too much. Thank you." Chapter 657. Xinyu didn't know how much his drunken words had changed his fate, nor did he know how terrible a disaster his words had brought to the Shen family. After Xinyu finished speaking, the security guards next to him were overjoyed. Naturally, they knew that if they worked for young Master Shen, they would be greatly rewarded after the job was done. As for which girl they had slept with and whose body they had ruined, it had nothing to do with them at all. This wasn't the first time they had done something like this. Some young ladies didn't dare to speak up after being gang raped, while some of the more hot-tempered ones would be intimidated by them, and their families would all give up, not daring to forcefully stand up for them. The few men who were full of evil ideas were discussing countermeasures, with evil smiles on their faces. They had no idea what kind of terrifying monster they were facing. After a group of people discussed in the bar, Xinyu filled the glass in front of him and said with red eyes, "Come on, let's drink up. If it's done, I promise I won't treat you badly." The security guards laughed, clinked their glasses, and drank up the wine in them. Then they stood up together and said loudly, "Let's go and do something." Xinyu led the crowd out of the bar aggressively, looking domineering and extremely arrogant. But as soon as he walked out of the bar, a cold wind suddenly blew, and Xinyu shivered for no reason. It was already late at night, and the moon was bright and the stars were sparse. There was a cool breeze outside, and the bustling streets of the city were busy with people coming and going. Xinyu felt cold all over for a moment in this steel city, and the drunkenness he had felt before had dissipated a lot. As soon as the smell of alcohol disappeared, he immediately regretted it. No matter how stupid he was, he knew that once he slept with Su Chan, Li Jiandong would definitely get angry. Once Li Jiandong got angry, would his father be on his side? If this had happened in the past, Xinyu would have done it without hesitation, because he knew that no matter how big the trouble he caused, his father would take care of it for him. After all, he was the only son in the family. If his father didn't side with him, who would? But now, Xinyu couldn't help but hesitate. His father was now a little unreasonable, spending 700 million to please him for an outsider. This was simply unimaginable. Gongzi and the other security guards saw Xinyu standing in the same place after leaving the bar. They couldn't help but look at each other. Gongzi asked, "Young Master Xin, what's wrong?" Xinyu's eyes flickered as he said, "No, nothing." Gongzi had some understanding of this young master of the Xin family. He deliberately took out a small plastic bag from his pocket. The plastic bag contained a few small blue pills. He said, "Young Master Xin, are you afraid? You're the dignified young master of the Xin family, yet you want to have sex with a little girl, yet you're still thinking about it?" Xinyu was provoked by him, and immediately remembered his humiliation. He was so angry that he grabbed the small plastic bag and said stiffly, "Who said I'm afraid?" Gongzi laughed. "Then let's go," Xinyu said angrily. "Let's go then." A group of people swaggered into the car and went straight to Xinyu's home. When Xinyu arrived home, he gave a few instructions to several security guards, and then entered the house himself. It was already past 9 o'clock in the evening. Most of the Xin family members had entered their rooms. Ziyuan, Zhou Qin and Su Chan, who were guests of the Xin family, stayed in their own rooms. Zhou Qin and Ziyuan were meditating, while Su Chan was lying on the bed, pressing the remote control with her hand, and watching soap operas in boredom. After Xinyu entered the house, he greeted the servants and went to the kitchen. He walked to the kitchen, looked around and thought to himself, "What will she eat? Wine? Snacks? By the way, she once participated in the tea art competition. She will definitely drink our top-grade Longjing tea." Thinking of this, Xinyu immediately took action. But when he made a cup of tea and was about to bring it to Su Chan, he thought, "No, if I bring it to her, whether she will drink it or not is also a problem. It's better to let housekeeper Zhang bring it to her." Yes, that's it. As soon as he opened his mouth and was about to call someone, he suddenly thought, "Wait, Steward Zhang will definitely wonder why I didn't bring tea to anyone else, but to Su Chan? If he lets it slip, won't it ruin my plan?" Thinking of this, Xinyu coughed dryly, called Steward Zhang over and said seriously, "Old Zhang, it's getting late. Prepare a midnight snack for everyone." Although Steward Zhang had seen his young master being severely taught a lesson by the old master today, he didn't mean to neglect him at all. After all, no matter how much he was beaten and scolded, he was still Shen Wansai's son. Steward Zhang smiled and said, "Young master, if the old master knew that you had such thoughts, he would be very happy." Xinyu smiled coldly. If he doesn't hit me, I'll burn incense in thanks." Steward Zhang muttered under his breath, but his hands were still working quickly. Young master, it's not that I want to criticize you, but it's not the first time you've heard of master's temper. Don't go against him. Can't you just go along with him a little?" Xinyu became impatient and urged, I know. Hurry up." Steward Zhang nodded quickly. After a while, he prepared a midnight snack for everyone. Just as he was about to call someone to deliver it, Xinyu said, "You can deliver it yourself, one by one. Don't tell her that I asked you to prepare it." In addition, he put the Longjing tea he had made on a plate and said, "Give this to Miss Su Chan, and don't tell her that I prepared it for her." Steward Zhang glanced at Xinyu. He naturally knew that his young master had been thinking about this girl since he came back from Dongwu City last time. But last time, he had seen with his own eyes how intimate Su Chan and Li Yundong were. She was obviously already taken, but his young master didn't give up. Alas, he didn't even know how to persuade him. Steward Zhang sighed and reached out to take Su Chan's plate. Only then did Xinyu remember that he hadn't put in his medicine yet. He quickly stopped him and said, "You go to Dad's first and then this." Steward Zhang was stunned. He couldn't help but look at his young master with a smile of relief on his face. "At least you have some conscience." Xinyu's eyes flickered as he said, Go. Steward Zhang didn't know that it was a trick, So he took the plate and went to Shin Wansai's room. After seeing him leave, Shin Yu quickly took out a small plastic bag from his arms and put one of the pills in it. But after he put one down, he felt that it was not safe, so he put another one in. But after putting two in, he couldn't help but grit his teeth and put all the small pills in the bag. Fortunately, the color of Longjing tea itself was dark green, and the fragrance was extremely pungent. After the pill was put in, it quickly dissolved, and nothing unusual could be seen or smelled. Not long after Shin Yu put the medicine in, he saw Steward Zhang come back. He watched Steward Zhang send the midnight snacks to each room one by one. Finally, when he sent Su Chan's plate into the room, he breathed a sigh of relief. At this time, Su Chan heard a knock on the door. She replied casually, "Come in." Steward Zhang walked in with a plate. Su Chan looked at him curiously and asked, "What's the matter?" Steward Zhang smiled slightly and said, "This is a midnight snack for Miss Su Chan." When Su Chan heard that there was food, she immediately beamed with joy and looked at the plate with a smile. She saw a cup of tea, a plate of snacks, and a plate of fruit salad on the plate. She was overjoyed and was about to reach for the food when she suddenly thought of something. She raised her head suspiciously and asked, "Why do you want to send me a midnight snack at this time? Where's Sister Ziyuan? Where's Sister Zhouqin?" Steward Zhang smiled and said, "They all have it. I just sent it to them." Su Chan asked curiously, "Aren't they practicing?" Housekeeper Zhang exclaimed, "So they are practicing martial arts? I was wondering why they were sitting cross-legged on the ground. No wonder. It turns out that they are cultivators. You can't judge a book by its cover." Su Chan was relieved to see that Ziyuan and Zhouqin also had it. She smiled and said to Steward Zhang, "Thank you. You can go out first. I want to eat." Steward Zhang chuckled, bent over and left. After he left, Su Chan couldn't wait to reach out and grab the food on the plate. She ate the desserts and fruit salad in a few bites. After eating, she felt that it wasn't enough, so she grabbed the Longjing tea on the side and poured the tea into her mouth with a gulp. As soon as she drank the tea, Su Chan was stunned and thought to herself, "Why does this tea taste strange?" Soon Su Chan felt a heat in her body. She couldn't help but be shocked and thought to herself, "What's going on? Is the tea poisoned?" Su Chan's face changed, and she didn't even dare to shout. She was afraid that if she shouted, it would agitate the qi and blood in her body and make her even more poisoned. She immediately sat down cross-legged and began to meditate. However, the medicinal power of this small blue pill was extremely fierce. One pill was enough to turn a brave woman into a zombie, not to mention that Shin Yu had put a small bag in it. After a while, Su Chan's qi and blood were in a mess due to the fierce medicinal power of the cultivation method. Her brain was burned, and she soon fell into a coma. Not long after she fell into a coma, Shin Yu came to the door of her room and knocked softly. After a few attempts, he pushed the door open and saw that Su Chan was lying on the bed. Her face was frighteningly red. It was obvious that she had passed out. Shin Yu was overjoyed. He immediately looked outside, only to see that there was no one in the living room. He quickly picked up Su Chan and walked to the backyard of his villa. He picked up his cell phone and dialed a number. As soon as the number got through, he immediately hung up. Not long after, two burly men jumped into his backyard. When the two men saw Su Chan, they immediately laughed and said, "She's really beautiful. Young Master Shin has good eyesight." Shin Yu was scared to death to do such a shameful thing in his own house. He hurriedly urged, "Hurry up, there are cameras in my backyard and at the front door. Hurry up and take people over the wall. Be careful not to be photographed." The security guard laughed and said, "Don't worry. We stole a car and are hiding." The two of them carried Su Chan over the wall and quickly left. After seeing them leave, Shin Yu took a deep breath and calmed his breathing a little. Then, he pretended to be calm and went straight to the place where they had agreed to meet. At this time, Zhouqin, who was cultivating in the room, slowly woke up after meditating for a while. However, after waking up, she suddenly felt that Su Chan's aura was no longer in the Shin family's villa. She couldn't help but be stunned and look at Su Chan's room in confusion. However, She also knew that it was not good for her to interfere with Su Chan's freedom. She just wondered why Su Chan had left without telling them. Zhou Qin was stunned for a while and shook her head. She didn't want to care about this matter, but not long after she closed her eyes, she felt a palpitation in her heart for no reason. She suddenly opened her eyes, stood up, and walked to Ziyuan's room. As soon as she entered the door, she saw Ziyuan standing at the door, looking like she was going out. Zhou Qin was stunned and said, "Ziyuan, are you going out too?" "Going out too? What do you mean by going out too?" Ziyuan frowned slightly. She glanced at Su Chan's room and asked, "Did you let Su Chan go out?" Zhou Qin was stunned and said, "No, I was about to ask you. I thought you were the one who asked Su Chan to go out." Ziyuan frowned slightly and complained in a low voice, "How can this girl run around alone at this time?" Zhou Qin said softly, "Maybe she has her own things to do? I believe she is not the kind of person who doesn't know how to behave." Ziyuan nodded slightly and said, "Maybe." Just as she was about to speak, she saw the door of a room not far away creak open. Shen Wankai came out with a slight smile on his face. "Ziyuan Fairy, Miss Zhou Qin, it's so late. Why haven't you slept yet?" Ziyuan smiled slightly and nodded politely to Shen Wankai. "Mr. Shen, you haven't slept yet?" Shen Wankai sighed softly. He stood in the corridor on the second floor, patted the railing with his hand and sighed. "Sorry for what happened today. I'm really ashamed of my son for not being able to discipline him well." Zhou Qin said, "Mr. Shen, don't say that. Isn't Shen Hui very reasonable?" Shen Wankai smiled and said, "Unfortunately, she is a girl." Zhou Qin raised her eyebrows and said, "What's wrong with girls? Even in the cultivation world, which values men more than women, even if they all say that men have 7 treasures and women have 5, there are still so many great female cultivators, aren't there? Even the cultivation world is like this, let alone the business world." Shen Wankai looked at Zhou Qin in surprise. This was the first time he had seen Zhou Qin reveal her identity in front of him. For a moment, his heart was filled with mixed feelings. "Miss Zhou Qin, you are indeed the descendant of a famous family. You are very knowledgeable. You are right. Sometimes, I tolerate this unfilial son again and again, just because as a father, I hope that one day my son can change his mind and become a prodigal son." At this time, Ziyuan smiled gently and said, "Mr. Shen's painstaking efforts can be seen by God. I believe that Shen Yu will feel it one day." As soon as she finished speaking, she heard Shen Wansai's cell phone suddenly ring. Shen Wankai apologized to Ziyuan and Zhou Qin, turned around, and took out his cell phone. He glanced at it and saw that it was a call from his son Shen Yu. He frowned slightly, hesitated for a moment, and then picked up the phone. As soon as he picked up the phone, he heard a terrified and heart-wrenching voice. "Help, Dad, help me." Shen Wankai was shocked. "You're... What's wrong? What's going on?" Both Ziyuan and Zhou Qin heard the cry for help, and they all took a step forward. They only heard Shen Yu's voice on the other end of the phone shouting hysterically, "Monster, Dad, there's a monster! Help me!" Chapter 658. When Chen Wankai heard Shen Yu's cry for help, he was shocked and quickly asked, "What happened? Tell me quickly. Where are you?" Shen Yu shouted, "I'm in room 502 of the Xinyuan Hotel. Dad, come here quickly." Before he could finish his words, there was a busy tone coming from the phone. Although Chen Wankai usually beat and scolded Shen Yu, blood was thicker than water after all. He hurriedly rushed downstairs and shouted at housekeeper Zhang, who had heard the noise and rushed out. "Old Zhang, get the car ready, get the car ready." Zhou Qin and Ziyuan looked at each other and saw a trace of surprise in each other's eyes. Zhou Qin whispered, "Something's wrong. How could Shen Yu meet a monster? Is he hallucinating or?" Ziyuan frowned and said in a low voice, "It can't be such a coincidence. Su Chan left before, and now he said he met a monster?" As they spoke, their eyes suddenly met, and they said in horror at the same time, "Oh no! Su Chan has shown his real body." Zhou Qin and Ziyuan naturally knew what it would mean if Su Chan showed his real body in the busy city. The two of them were so shocked that their hearts were about to jump out of their chests. Ziyuan was frightened, and Zhou Qin's face was livid. She quickly turned to Chen Wankai and said, "Mr. Shen, I'm sorry." After that, she grabbed Chen Wansai's collar and nodded to Ziyuan. The two of them instantly turned into a beam of blue light and flew out. Before Chen Wankai could react, he felt his body become light, and he flew up lightly. For a moment, he could only hear the sound of the wind whistling in his ears. His skin felt as if it had been cut back and forth by thousands of knives, and the strong wind made his skin hurt. Shen Wankai wanted to open his eyes, but the strong wind made it impossible for him to do so. But not long after, he suddenly heard the sound of glass shattering. His feet suddenly sank, and in an instant he stood on the ground again. Only then did Chen Wankai feel that all his internal organs had fallen back into his stomach. When he opened his eyes to take a look, he was so scared that his internal organs were about to pop out of his chest in an instant. In this spacious hotel room, there was a fiery red fox. This fox was so huge that her whole body almost occupied the room. She was covered in blood, and there were two corpses lying at her feet. One had been trampled into pieces, and could no longer be seen. One could only vaguely see that he was wearing a camouflage vest when he was alive. The other had half of his body bitten off, and his internal organs and green intestines were scattered on the ground. At this time, the balcony window was open, and the night wind blew in. For a moment, the room was filled with a pungent smell of blood in the room, making Chen Wankai feel sick. However, the most terrifying thing was not this, but the fact that this fox with fiery red fur had 7 incomparably huge tails. Among these 7 tails, one was golden, and there was a person wrapped in it. Only the head was exposed, but blood was flowing out of all 7 orifices. It was obvious that the huge force of the tail had crushed all the blood vessels in his body to death. The fox was holding a person in her mouth. She glared angrily at a man curled up in the corner, opening her mouth and biting the man bit by bit. Chen Wankai was so scared by the scene in front of him that he almost fainted. He staggered and fell to the ground. He supported himself with his hands, and suddenly felt that his hands were slippery. When he raised them, he saw that they were covered in blood. Zhou Qin and Ziyuan were also frightened by the scene in front of them. Ziyuan immediately turned her head and shouted at Zhou Qin, "Go to the door and block the others. I'll deal with this." Without saying a word, Zhou Qin rushed out and blocked the door like a door god. She stared at every busybody who wanted to see what was going on in the room. Those who got a little closer were thrown far away by her like chickens. Ziyuan glanced at the man hiding in the corner and found that it was Xinyu. She walked up to the 7-tailed fox and said in a deep voice, "Suchan, calm down. What happened?" Suchan. Chen Wansai's mind was buzzing, but he suddenly heard such a sentence. He raised his head abruptly and looked at the terrifying 7-tailed fox with his mouth agape. She is Suchan? Xinyu, who was curled up in the corner, suddenly heard Chen Wansai's voice. He raised his head, and his face showed ecstasy. He rolled and crawled toward Chen Wankai. The room was soaked in blood. As soon as Xinyu crawled, he immediately turned into a bloody man. He threw himself into Chen Wansai's arms and cried loudly, "Dad, help me!" Chen Wankai was also frightened to the point of losing control. He was shocked, scared, and flustered. He patted Xinyu on the back and said, don't worry. Dad is here." "What happened? Why are you here? Why is Suchan here? How did she become like this?" There was a flash of panic in Xinyu's eyes. He wailed and said, "I don't know. She asked me to come here, and said she had something to do with me. Who would have thought that she was a monster? She became like this when she came in." As soon as he finished speaking, Suchan, who had transformed into her real body, suddenly glared at Xinyu and roared furiously. "Howl!" This roar immediately shattered all the glass in the room. Chen Wankai and Xinyu's eardrums were almost broken. They covered their ears at the same time, their faces full of pain. Ziyuan quickly threw out a talisman and stuck it on Suchan's body. She turned her head and shouted angrily at Xinyu, "You're lying. Why would Suchan look for you? She is a good girl who is kind to others, and can't even bear to trample ants to death. How could she do evil? You must have done something to provoke her." How could Xinyu be willing to tell his father what he had done? He braced himself and cried loudly. But she is a monster. When a monster is fierce, there is no reason to talk about it. How can there be a good monster? At first, Ziyuan also thought the same as Xinyu. Humans and demons can't coexist. A demon is a demon, and there is no good monster. However, the longer she spent with Su Chan, the more she liked this innocent and lovely little fox spirit. Especially the sincere feelings between her and Li Yundong. She was deeply moved. At this time, when she suddenly heard Xinyu's words, Ziyuan was furious. She roared in an extremely rare manner. How dare you say that she is a demon? I think you are a demon, but she is not. Xinyu was greatly frightened. At this time, his nerves had already fallen into a state of madness. He waved his arms and shouted, "Look at my appearance, and then look at her appearance. Who is a demon and who is a human? Do you still need to ask?" Ziyuan roared angrily. She is just a fox spirit, but she has a kinder heart than anyone else. You are wearing a human skin, but you have the dirtiest heart in the world. Do you think I won't know if you don't tell me? Ziyuan pointed at Su Chan and roared angrily. Do you know what her cultivation quotient is? She is a seven-tailed fox spirit. She can easily destroy your whole family. If she wants to make trouble for you, would she bring you to this place? Do you know how careful and cautious she is when she hides her tracks in the secular world? Only when she spits out her internal organs to heal, or when her qi and blood are boiling uncontrollably, will she be forced to show her true body. For a fox spirit, revealing her true body in the secular world for others to find out is a fatal disaster. Would she be so stupid as to bring about her own destruction? Ziyuan was trembling all over, as if she was using all her strength to restrain herself. Her hands were trembling, and she couldn't wait to slap Xinyu on the head. She said in a trembling voice, "Tell me, what did you do to her to make her show her true body? Tell me quickly. Otherwise, if the seven-tailed fox spirit goes crazy, I won't be able to save you." As if to answer Ziyuan's words, Su Chan, who had turned into a seven-tailed fox spirit, glared at Xinyu with fire in her eyes. She bared her teeth, and her mouth was full of blood. She looked extremely ferocious. Xinyu was so scared that he shivered. He was stunned for a while, then suddenly pointed to the broken body on the ground and shouted in a hoarse voice, "It's them. They wanted to drug Su Chan and do it with her. I wanted to stop them, but I couldn't." Xinyu looked at Ziyuan's angry eyes and hurriedly shouted in panic, "Su Chan is fine. She was brought in by these bastards and turned into a demon. We didn't touch her at all." Ziyuan sneered angrily and said, "Do you think you can take advantage of her? You must be tired of living. If you want to stop them, then why are you with them? Why did they make trouble for Su Chan? Humph, you don't even know how to make up lies." I'm not lying, I didn't." Xinyu looked at the horrified Su Chan, and then at the angry Ziyuan. He panicked and turned to Xin Wankai, shouting at the top of his voice, "Dad, save me. I really didn't do it. I didn't do it. I swear. You must save me." At this time, how could Xin Wankai not understand what had happened? He knew his useless son too well. As the saying goes, no one knows a son better than his father. When Xinyu appeared here, Xin Wankai had already guessed some clues. At this time, hearing what he said, his heart was like a mirror. Xin Wankai smiled sadly. He didn't even look at Xinyu. Instead, he stared at Ziyuan and said in a trembling voice, "It turns out that there are not only immortals in this world, but also monsters." Ziyuan's face was livid. She snorted angrily and didn't say a word. She turned her head and floated up. She pressed her hand on Su Chan's forehead and mobilized her purest Jinqi to help Su Chan slowly suppress her boiling qi and blood. Xin Wankai watched Su Chan slowly turn from a terrifying seven-tailed fox into a petite and beautiful girl who was curled up into a ball. He smiled bitterly and said, "I really didn't expect that the thing I dreamed of most in my life, the immortal I dreamed of most, would appear in such a form." Xin Wankai slowly struggled to stand up from the pool of blood. He asked with a bitter smile, "Ziyuan immortal, is it true that seeing a seven-tailed fox will lead to the destruction of the whole family?" Ziyuan stared at Xinyu, and a rare trace of murderous aura flashed between her eyebrows. She gritted her teeth and said, "Then you should ask your precious son. and then ask Su Chan. Also, don't blame me for not reminding you. If Li Yundong finds out about what happened tonight, your whole family will be in danger. This sentence scared Shen Wankai and Shin Yu so much that they trembled. Shin Yu said in a hoarse voice, "Who does he think he is? Isn't he afraid of legal sanctions and retribution for destroying the whole family?" Shen Wankai also said in a trembling voice, Young Master Li, he won't?" Zi Yuan said sternly, "He won't? No matter how rich your Shen family is. Can you be more powerful than the He family? Do you know how young Master He died? No matter how arrogant you are, can you be more arrogant than young Master He? Even young Master He was killed by Li Yundong, let alone you, Shen Yu. Do you know what kind of person Li Yundong is? He seems to be gentle and approachable, but if you touch his reverse scale, he will definitely fight you to the death. Do you know what it means to be angry for a beauty? Do you know what Li Yundong has done for Su Chan?" Zi Yuan saw that the father and son had already seen Su Chan's real body, and many things had been torn apart, so she simply revealed some of the shameful things. This fairy, who was usually elegant and modest, was furious, and her power was really shocking. Although there were many frightening words in her words, Shen Yu and Shen Wankai did not dare to disbelieve her, especially Shen Wankai. It was as if a bolt of lightning had struck his mind, and he suddenly said, "It turns out that young Master He was really killed by Li Jiandong." The people in the upper echelons of Tiannan City naturally knew something about young Master He's death. Many of them had guessed that young Master He's death had a great relationship with Li Yundong, but no one had guessed that young Master He had been killed by Li Yundong. He actually dared to attract lightning to kill the son of a high-ranking official. Was there anything in the world that he didn't dare to do? Shen Wankai had been in the business world for half of his life. He was used to all kinds of storms and dangers, but at this time, he was suddenly scared to the point of shivering, and all the hair on his body suddenly stood on end. He suddenly realized a problem. Since Zi Yuan has told me such an important thing, what does it mean? Shen Wankai looked at Zi Yuan in despair. A terrible thought flashed through his mind. Does she want to kill me, or even destroy my whole family? Chapter 659. The thought that flashed through Chen Wansai's mind made him shudder. This man, who had been in the business world for half of his life, had seen all kinds of conspiracies and sinister scenes, could not help but feel a deep fear in his heart when facing a young woman who was much younger than him. For a rich man like Chen Wankai, such a terrible thing as the destruction of his family was something he had never dreamed of. Especially for a rich man like him, who had started from scratch. What he wanted most was to live longer, to work harder and more solid for his foundation and country, so that his branches and leaves could spread more widely. But now, everything seemed to have been destroyed, because he had given birth to a good-for-nothing son. Wealth could not last for 3 generations. Was this really the curse of the rich? But he was only the second generation. Was he going to die as the second generation of the Qin family? No, there must be a way, there must be a chance. Chen Wankai shivered and stared at Zi Yuan, as if he wanted to find some clues from her expression. However, Zi Yuan's eyes were as cold as water, and he couldn't see anything unusual. Shin Yu, who was standing to one side, also noticed the terrible killing intent. He grabbed Chen Wankai and shouted in horror, "Dad, don't be afraid. She's threatening us. What era is this? How can there be such a thing as extermination?" As he said this, he shouted at Zi Yuan in a threatening manner. "Are you crazy? The extermination of a family is a capital crime. No one can save you." Zi Yuan didn't even look at him. She said coldly, "You should think about how to save yourself first." Chen Wankai turned his face and looked at his son with tears streaming down his face. He said in a trembling voice, It's my fault. I didn't teach you well when you were young. It's my fault." Shin Yu looked at his father in horror and shouted, "Dad, what did you say? We don't have to be afraid of them. I don't believe they dare to destroy our Shin family. There are also people above us." Shen Wankai didn't seem to hear what he said. He hugged his son tightly, as if this was the last time he would hug him. After letting go of Shin Yu, he turned around and wiped his tears. The expression on his face slowly returned to normal, As if in an instant, he had returned to the powerful and ambitious man in the business world. Chen Wankai calmly said to Zi Yuan, "Zi Yuan immortal, I will give you an explanation. However, can you come back to my house first? It's really not convenient here." Zi Yuan walked over to the unconscious Su Chan and gently covered her with her ninth heaven Zi Yuan silk. Then, she took out a talisman from her bosom, pinched her fingers and shouted to the door, "Zhou Qin, take care of the follow-up here." Zhou Qin's voice came from outside the door. "Don't worry, leave it to me." Zi Yuan nodded and grabbed the collars of Chen Wankai and Xinyu with both hands. Her figure flashed and turned into a green light. When Chen Wankai and Xinyu opened their eyes again, they found that they had returned to the Shen family's villa. It had only been more than 10 minutes since they had come and gone. At this time, the Shen family's villa was in a mess. The second wife, the third wife, and the fourth wife were so anxious that they were pacing around in the living room. Just as they were panicking, Shen Wankai and Xinyu suddenly appeared in front of them. Beside them stood Zi Yuan and Su Chan, whose whole body was wrapped in purple silk. The fourth concubine, Li Shaoxian, saw her son covered in blood and looked as if he had been greatly frightened. Her heart suddenly trembled. She immediately rushed to Xinyu and said in a trembling voice, "You what happened? How did you end up like this?" The third concubine, Auntie Zheng, rushed to Chen Wankai with concern and said, "Old man, where are you hurt? Why is there so much blood? Zhang, hurry up, call an ambulance." Chen Wankai raised his hand and stopped housekeeper Zhang from making a phone call. He said in a hoarse voice, "It's okay. It's not my blood." Li Shaoxian was shocked and frantically searched Xinyu's body. "Is it yours? What happened to you? Where are you hurt?" Xinyu looked at his father in horror, and then moved his eyes to Zi Yuan. He said in a trembling voice, "Mom, someone wants to kill us. Call the police, call the police." Li Shaoxian was shocked and raised her head abruptly. Who has the guts?" Chen Wankai laughed. The terror of his laughter made those who were familiar with him feel creepy. He turned his face and said to housekeeper Zhang, "Zhang, close all the doors and forbid anyone from entering or leaving. Also, go and get a knife." When everyone in the Shen family saw Chen Wankai laughing, they felt goosebumps all over their bodies. When they heard his last words, they were so scared that their hair stood on end. Auntie Zheng grabbed Chen Wankai and said in surprise, "Old man, what are you doing with a knife?" Chen Wankai turned his face and stared at her coldly and terrifyingly. He said coldly, "Let go." Auntie Zheng trembled under his gaze. She was speechless. Housekeeper Zhang was also frightened. He stood there and didn't know what to do. Chen Wankai glared at him and shouted angrily, "Zhang, how many years have you been with me? Do I have to repeat myself a second time? If you don't want to go, I'll go by myself." Housekeeper Zhang was so scared that he quickly went back to the kitchen. After a while, he came back with a fruit knife. Chen Wankai kicked him without looking at it. "Do you want to die? Why are you using such a small knife?" Housekeeper Zhang was kicked by him and quickly crawled into the kitchen. This time he took a kitchen knife and handed it to Chen Wankai with a frightened expression. He said in a trembling voice, "Master, calm down. What's so serious that you need to use a knife?" Chen Wankai held the kitchen knife in his hand, weighed it in his hand, and rubbed the blade with his thumb. He laughed strangely and said, Good, it's very sharp. What a good butcher's knife." As he said this, he turned his face and said lightly to Xinyu, "Give me your hand." This sentence was like a clap of thunder, scaring all the Shen family members. Li Shaoxian looked at Chen Wankai in disbelief. "Old Shen, what are you doing? Are you crazy?" Although Lao San had always been at odds with Lao Si, especially because he was jealous of her having a son, Chen Wansai's behavior was too abnormal and strange. She was so scared that she hugged Chen Wansai's arm and shouted, "Old master, he is your son." Mrs. Ma, the second oldest, was so scared that she grabbed the Buddha beads in front of her chest with both hands and kept turning them, chanting scriptures in a trembling voice. Xinyu stared at his father with wide eyes and shouted, "Dad, are you crazy? I didn't do anything wrong. What are you going to do?" Chen Wankai laughed bitterly. "You know best whether you did anything wrong or not. Now there are only two ways in front of you. I will kill all of you, and then I will commit suicide. The other way is that I will cut off your evil hand, and then beg Li Jiandong to let us go. Choose for yourself. Xinyu was so scared that he collapsed to the ground. Although he had thought that if this matter were to happen, the consequences might be very serious. But at most, he would be slapped like before and grounded for a few months, without pocket money. However, he never thought that this time it would be so serious. Li Xiaoxian grabbed the kitchen knife from Chen Wansai's hand and shouted crazily, "Old Shen, you are crazy. What on earth did he do that made you do such a cruel thing? Haven't you heard that tigers don't eat their cubs?" Chen Wankai laughed bitterly and said, "Yes, it's because tigers don't eat their cubs that I didn't kill him. What did your precious son do? Why don't you ask him yourself?" Xinyu was so scared that he quickly cried to Li Xiaoxian, "Mom, I didn't do anything. I really didn't do anything. Help me." Li Xiaoxian cried bitterly. She hugged her son and shouted, Mom believes in you. Don't be afraid. I will definitely save you." Chen Wankai suddenly became furious. He kicked Li Xiaoxian in the heart and roared angrily, "You saved him? I'm telling you, you are the one who hurt you. Do you know what it means to have a loving mother and a spoiled son? If you hadn't indulged him again and again, would he have become like this today?" Li Xiaoxian was kicked to the ground by him. For a moment, she was in so much pain that she curled up into a ball and couldn't get up. She could only cry loudly. For a moment, the Shen family's villa was gloomy and murderous. Chen Wankai turned his face and glared at Xinyu with a ferocious expression. He shouted, "Give me your hand." Xinyu was unwilling to do so. He quickly withdrew his hand behind his back and kept crawling backward. Chen Wankai quickly stepped forward and kicked Xinyu in the head, causing him to turn over. Then he stepped on him with one foot, grabbed his arm with one hand, and waved the kitchen knife with the other. He roared, "Is it this hand? Is it this hand that touched Su Chan?" Xinyu was so scared that his whole body was trembling. His pants were wet in an instant. He shouted hoarsely, "Mom, help me." When Li Xiaoxian heard her son's cry, the pain in her body seemed to disappear in an instant. She got up and rushed toward Chen Wankai like a madman. "If you dare to touch my son, I'll fight you to the death." Chen Wankai was furious. He raised his hand and slashed at Li Xiaoxian's face. Li Xiaoxian looked at the knife coming at her, and was so scared that she was stunned on the spot. She didn't even know how to dodge. However, Chen Wansai's knife stopped at the moment it was about to cut her. The cold blade stopped at the tip of her nose. Chen Wankai gritted his teeth and said, "Li Xiaoxian, let me tell you, this knife of mine can not only save you, but also the lives of all the people in the Shen family. Maybe it can also save you's life. But if I don't chop down with this knife, don't regret the consequences in the future." Li Xiaoxian was also a very scheming woman. She knew Shen Wankai very well. She knew that the old man of the Shen family was a real ambitious and ruthless person. He was usually gentle and elegant and looked like a human. But once he got serious, he was really like an eagle looking at a wolf, iron-blooded and ruthless. Especially when it came to cutting off one's wrist and one's arm in order to survive. He would not even blink his eyelids when he did this kind of thing. If she continued to stop him, then for the sake of herself and the Shen family, Chen Wankai would definitely not care about the relationship between husband and wife at all. He would go back and kill her too. Moreover, Li Xiaoxian also knew that Chen Wankai was a very sensible and astute person. If he hadn't been forced into a dead end, he would never have done such a crazy thing. Li Xiaoxian gave in an instant. She covered her face and cried bitterly. She sat down on the ground and cried loudly. Seeing that his mother had given up, Xinyu was so scared that he shouted crazily and kept begging for mercy. "Mom, save me, save me." Xinyu's hysterical begging for mercy was heart-wrenching. Even Shen Hui, who had always looked down on her brother, couldn't bear it. She walked up to Ziyuan and whispered, "Sister Ziyuan, please let my brother go this time. He already knows that he's wrong. He won't dare to do it again." Ziyuan said with a cold face, "There is karma in the world, and there is retribution in heaven and earth." What if he hadn't provoked Su Chan this time, but some other girl who had no strength to fight back? Then it wouldn't have been him who would have sought death, but those girls. What would you have done to them? Who would have upheld justice for them? Who would have upheld justice for them? Tell me, if you were the one who had been insulted, what would you have done? Since you've done something wrong, you have to bear the consequences of doing something wrong. Ziyuan's words made Xinhui speechless. She sighed softly, shook her head, and retreated to the side. Xinyu's face was twisted with fear. He shouted at Li Xiaoxian, "Mom, save me!" Li Xiaoxian's heart was broken by his shout. She raised her head with tears streaming down her face. She stroked her son's face, which was distorted by fear, and said in a trembling voice, It's okay. It'll be fine in a while. It'll be fine in a while." Xinyu was so frightened by Li Xiaoxian that his expression was dull. "Mom, what are you talking about? What are you talking about?" Shen Wankai raised his head and laughed. He said in a hoarse voice, "There is karma in the world, and there is retribution in heaven and earth." Well said, well said. Why didn't I hear such words before? Why didn't anyone tell me earlier? After that, he roared and raised the steel knife in his hand high. The blade was cold and suddenly chopped down. Chapter 660. Shen Wankai raised the knife in his hand and fell. With a crack, Shenyu's arm was immediately cut into 2 pieces. Blood sprayed everywhere and splashed on Shen Wankai's ferocious face. Xinyu roared in pain and fell to the ground, trembling all over. Seeing this bloody scene, Li Xiaoxian fainted without saying a word. Xinhui was so scared that she hid in her mother's arms. The third concubine was also so scared that she trembled all over. She held Xinhui and turned her back, not daring to look again. The second concubine closed her eyes and quickly recited the Buddhist scriptures with a frightened expression. She didn't dare to take another look. After Shen Wankai raised the knife in his hand, he pointed at Xinyu with the bloody knife and said in a hoarse voice, "From now on, you are no longer a member of the Shen family. Go." Xinyu covered his broken arm. He kept rolling on the ground in pain, screaming. His face was smeared with tears and snot mixed with his own blood. But after rolling for a while, he suddenly stood up shakily. He stared at Li Xiaoxian and his father with red eyes and roared, "I hate you, I hate you." After saying that, he stumbled and rushed out. Steward Zhang, who had been scared stiff, subconsciously wanted to stop him. But Shen Wankai immediately shouted, "Old Zhang, let him go. Whether he lives or dies in the future, leave it to God to decide. I'll pretend that I never had a son like him." Steward Zhang's face was also full of tears. "Master, he's your son." Shen Wankai was unmoved. He turned his face, threw down the kitchen knife, and knelt down in front of Ziyuan with a thud. He presented Shenyu's broken arm to her with both hands, and said in a trembling voice, "Can this dispel young Master Li's anger?" Ziyuan's face was expressionless. After a long while, she nodded slowly. Shen Wankai suddenly felt as if all the strength in his body had been sucked away in an instant. His body softened and his hands propped up on the ground. His face showed a rare look of sadness and love. He looked at Shenyu's leaving figure and said in a trembling voice, Don't blame me. Dad did it for your own good. My father used to be very strict with me. He often beat and scolded me, which made me very painful. So I swore a long time ago that if I had a son, I would treat him well and not beat or scold him. But now I regret it. If I had been stricter with you when you were young, you wouldn't be like this today. It's all my fault, all my fault." As Shen Wankai spoke, he beat his chest with both hands and burst into tears. For a moment, the rest of the Shen family also burst into tears. Ziyuan sighed softly. Just as she was about to speak, she saw a flash of blue light at the door. Zhou Qin had returned. Zhou Qin saw that the hall of the Shen family's villa was covered in blood, and everyone was crying. She couldn't help but frown and say, "What's wrong?" Ziyuan told her what had happened just now in a low voice. Zhou Qin snorted coldly and said in a low voice, "He got lucky. But why not get rid of all the evils?" Ziyuan shook her head and said, "Heaven has the virtue of cherishing life. Although it was the duty of a cultivator to enforce justice on behalf of the heavens, one should never truly regard oneself as the heavens. Although Xinyu was wrong, he didn't deserve to die. Losing an arm, and being expelled from the family is already the greatest punishment for him. As for whether he will choose to be a good person, or continue to be a bad person in the future, it will depend on his luck. Zhou Qin sighed softly and said, "What you said makes sense. It's just that I just thought of Deng Yu and Deng Jiao, who were forced to death by young Master He. I can't help but feel angry." After that, Zhou Qin looked at Ziyuan strangely and said in a low voice, "By the way, I heard what you said in the hotel. Did you deliberately tell Shen Wankai about young Master He?" Ziyuan nodded slightly. "Yes, if I hadn't said it, Shen Wankai wouldn't have realized the seriousness of the matter. He might have been lucky and even turned against us. Shen Wankai has the disposition of an ambitious and ruthless person. You can see it from his decision just now. If this person can't be subdued as a friend, then we absolutely can't let him be our enemy." Zhou Qin frowned and said, "Aren't you afraid that you will force him into a dead end and fight with us like a trapped beast?" Ziyuan shook her head and said, "No, Shen Wankai is a smart man. He still wants to live a long life. The moment I threw out my trump card, I told him in a subtext, either he will be our enemy and be destroyed, or he will immediately submit to us and stand on the same boat as us. As it turned out, Shen Wankai understood my intention very quickly. That was why he had to cut off his arm to save his life. Look at this broken arm. It's clearly a sign of loyalty." Although Zhou Qin had experienced several fierce battles, she still felt a little dazzling when she suddenly saw Shen Yu's broken arm. She frowned and said, "Then what should we do next? Won't the rest of the Shen family regard us as enemies?" Ziyuan said, "As long as Shen Wankai is here, they won't be able to overturn the sky. It's just that the price Shen Wankai has paid this time is too great." Zhou Qin chuckled and said, "A strong man cuts his wrist, and a lizard cuts its tail. Shen Wankai is indeed a powerful person. Amazing, amazing. He's a character." Ziyuan didn't seem to want to talk about this anymore. She turned her face away, and just as her eyes fell on Su Chan, she heard her groan, as if she was gradually waking up. Ziyuan and Zhou Qin were overjoyed. They quickly squatted down and asked anxiously, "Su Chan, are you awake?" Su Chan groaned in a daze. "Thirsty, so thirsty." Ziyuan immediately raised her head and said, "Water, get some water." But at this time, the people of the Shen family were crying with Shen Wankai. Only housekeeper Zhang was still holding on. He wiped his tears, quickly ran to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and then brought it over. "The water is here." Ziyuan took it and brought it to Su Chan's mouth, but Su Chan reluctantly turned her face away and whispered, "The water of the Shen family is poisonous. You can't drink it." These words made the faces of the Shen family burn with shame. Ziyuan brought the tea to her mouth and took a sip under Su Chan's gaze. Then, she brought it to her mouth and said softly, "Drink it. The water is not poisonous. I've tried it." Only then did Su Chan feel relieved. She opened her red lips and greedily drank all the water in the cup. After Su Chan drank this large glass of water, she kept complaining of thirst. Housekeeper Zhang poured her 8 glasses of water in a row. After Su Chan finished drinking, she felt a little better and stopped asking for water. Zhou Qin, who was standing to one side, was very puzzled. She asked Su Chan in a low voice, "Su Chan, what kind of poison did you get? Why did you drink so much water?" Su Chan moaned in pain. "It's so hot, my whole body is so hot." Ziyuan squatted down, pressed her fingers on Su Chan's pulse, and said in a deep voice, "It's a strong aphrodisiac." Zhou Qin asked in surprise, "A 7-tailed fox spirit will be enchanted by a strong aphrodisiac? Will ordinary poisons also work on us?" Ziyuan said with a cold face, "When cultivators cultivate their 5 internal organs, they often cultivate their liver and kidneys to be very strong. The liver is detoxifying, and the kidneys are detoxifying. Therefore, we cultivators are not afraid of ordinary poisons, because our own liver and kidneys have extremely strong detoxifying and detoxifying abilities. But this kind of aphrodisiac is different from ordinary poisons. Its function is to stimulate the human body's hormones and the speed of qi and blood circulation. It can be said that it is actually a kind of enhancer and aphrodisiac." The liver and kidneys can't offset its effect. Zhou Qin gritted her teeth and said in a low voice, "Fortunately, we didn't make things worse tonight. Otherwise, the consequences would be unimaginable." Zi Yuan pressed Su Chan's shunting acupoint with her hand, and slowly poured her pure yin qi into Su Chan's body to calm down the hot qi and blood all over her body. At the same time, she whispered to Su Chan, "Su Chan, how did you take these pills?" Su Chan struggled to open her eyes and said with difficulty, "Someone sent me a midnight snack, and then I was poisoned after eating it." Her words shocked the third concubine, Auntie Zheng, and she cried out, "But we all ate it. How can we be fine?" At this time, Steward Zhang's face suddenly changed. He stamped his feet and said, "Alas, I see, I see." Auntie Zheng turned to look at Steward Zhang and asked in surprise, "Old Zhang, what do you mean?" Steward Zhang wiped his tears and said, "Young master once told me to give Miss Su Chan a midnight snack with Longjing tea. He also told me not to tell her that it was from young master. I didn't think of it at that time. Alas, it's all my fault. If I had noticed it earlier, such a thing wouldn't have happened." At this time, Shen Wankai was already a little tired from crying. With the help of Shen Hui, he slowly stood up and said in a hoarse voice, "Don't say it, it's all fate." He turned his face and said to Su Chan, "Miss Su Chan, I have already driven my unfilial son out of the house. If there is anything else you are not satisfied with, please tell me. I will definitely do it." At this time, Su Chan only felt that her head was burning into paste. She groaned in pain and said, "I want to go home, I want to go home. Yindong, where are you? I'm so sad." Zi Yuan quickly picked her up and coaxed her as if she were coaxing a child. "Su Chan, be good. I'll take you back now." After Zi Yuan stood up, she bowed slightly to Shen Wankai to show respect and politeness. She said softly, "Mr. Shen, neither of us wanted to see what happened today, but what's done can't be undone. I hope that Mr. Shen can focus on his health and not think about other unnecessary things. As for Li Yundong, I will tell him what happened and the result. I believe that Li Yundong is also a reasonable person and will not pursue the matter any further." Shen Wankai seemed to have aged 10 years in an instant. He looked old and said in a choked voice, "Zi Yuan immortal, I won't say anything unnecessary. You can do as you please. I hope that the two families will be friends in the future, not enemies." Zhou Qin sighed softly and said, "Mr. Shen, my father is right. You are indeed a great person. See you later." Shen Wankai watched the two of them leave and stood there in a daze. After a long time he laughed strangely and said, "A great person? I cut off my own son's arm with my own hands. I'm really a great person." Shen Wankai laughed, but tears flowed down unconsciously. Third Aunt Taijin, who was standing to one side, also cried with him and said, "Old master, what should we do in the future? How should we deal with the current situation? What about Xinyu? What about Li Yundong?" Shen Wankai waved his hand weakly and slowly sat down on the sofa. His old and thin body seemed to shrink into the sofa. He said in a hoarse voice, "You all go to rest. No one is allowed to mention what happened today. As for you, none of you are allowed to look for him. Leave his fate to God." After saying that, he buried his head deep into his palms and let out a deep sigh. After the storm of the Shin family, Zi Yuan and Zhou Qin returned home with Su Chan. Zhou Qin saw Zi Yuan sitting by the bed and staring at Su Chan, who was sleeping soundly. There was a strange light in her eyes. She couldn't help but ask curiously, "What's wrong? Why do you look at Su Chan a little strange?" Zi Yuan turned around and said with a serious face, "When you broke the window of the hotel room with me, did you notice something?" Zhou Qin asked in confusion, "What is it?" Zi Yuan's eyes flickered and fell on Su Chan. "Why is one of Su Chan's 7 tails golden?" Zhou Qin was stunned. "Golden tail? What's wrong with that?" Zi Yuan said with a serious face, "Since ancient times, only the tail of the 9-tailed celestial fox is golden, and since ancient times, only the mystical silver fox has cultivated to the realm of 9 tails. So it can be said that only the tail and fur of the mystical silver fox are golden, and the other foxes are not golden." Zhou Qin was shocked and looked at Su Chan with her mouth agape. You mean? Su-chan. Ziyuan shook her head. I'm not sure yet. Zhou-chin didn't say anything. She looked at Su-chan with shock and complexity in her eyes, and her expression changed. She didn't dare to imagine. If the innocent girl in front of her was the mystical silver fox, how would she face it? Seeing Zhou-chin's nervous expression, as if she was facing a formidable enemy, Ziyuan couldn't help laughing. Don't worry. Things haven't been settled yet. Maybe Su-chan's physique is special. Besides, hasn't the mystical silver fox been released in Japan now? No matter what, she will take back the remnant soul of Chow Kefi first. And Su-chan doesn't look like the remnant soul of the mystical silver fox. As Ziyuan spoke, she slowly fell silent with Zhou-chin. The two powerful female cultivators looked at each other and saw deep worry in each other's eyes. If Su-chan was really the incarnation of the remnant soul of the mystical silver fox, what should they do? Or, even if she wasn't, and she really became a nine-tailed celestial fox, what should they do? Since ancient times, the appearance of the nine-tailed celestial fox had always been a sign of great chaos. Where there was a nine-tailed celestial fox, there would be war, turmoil, disaster, and suffering. If all this really came, what should they do? What should Li Jiandong do? Chapter 661. Tiannan City was bustling late at night. The pedestrians on the road were surprised to see a young man covered in blood stumbling all the way. The young man seemed to have lost an arm, and blood kept flowing from it. His face was pale, but his eyes were bloodshot, full of resentment and unwillingness. It was as if an inexplicable force of hatred was supporting him, as he kept running forward. This man was Xinyu. Some kind-hearted passers-by wanted to help him, but he roared and roared. Get out of my way! Get out of my way! Seeing that Xinyu had taken their kindness for granted, the passers-by shook their heads and stopped moving forward, watching his figure slowly disappear into the shadows of the streets and alleys. Xinyu ran all the way, bleeding all the way. Slowly, he could not run anymore. He sat down in a dark alley, his body curled up into a ball, one hand tightly covering the wound of his broken hand. His whole body was trembling, his teeth were clenched, and his eyes were shining with an extremely sinister light. He felt that the blood in his body was flowing little by little, his strength was slowly drying up, his life was slowly fading, and his body was getting colder and colder. All of this clearly showed him one fact. He was slowly dying. I don't want to die, I don't want to die. Xinyu screamed, his face distorted like a hysterical madman, but soon he began to sob in pain. Although he cried loudly, the water in his body seemed to have turned into blood and flowed away, and not a single tear fell. Xinyu cried for a while, and the more he felt his consciousness become blurred. He looked around and saw that he was in a dark alley between two buildings. Outside the alley was a bustling market. People in bright clothes came and went in the market, and all kinds of good cars were shuttling back and forth on the road. Once upon a time, he had looked down at these ordinary citizens as arrogantly as these people, but today, he was curled up in this dark corner like a dead dog. Why is this happening? Xinyu's mind buzzed as he thought about this question. He couldn't help but think of the most regretful decision in his life. He really shouldn't have provoked Su-chan. Who would have known that she was a monster? Most importantly, he didn't get to eat fish. It would have been fine if he only got dirty, but he actually got himself into such a situation. Xinyu couldn't help but recall the scene when he had just entered the room. Su-chan was paralyzed on the bed, and Gongzi and the other three were standing in the same place, panting. Yutzi Yuyu's turn at that time. He was surprised and asked what had happened. Gongzi said that when they got Su-chan into the car, the girl suddenly struggled crazily, and the strength of her fists and feet was terrible. The four of them were almost broken by her fists and feet. In the end, if they hadn't used the electric baton to knock the girl out, he was afraid that they would have had a car accident. How ridiculous! An unconscious girl was able to torment them like this. How ridiculous! No, she's a monster. No wonder she's so powerful. Gongzi, you guys really deserve to die. If it weren't for your suggestion, how could I, Xinyu, have become like this? Xinyu couldn't help but cry again. He suddenly remembered the scene after that. At that time, he was still laughing and asking them if they had sex with the girl on the way. Gongzi the idiot said with a flattering smile, "Of course not. Isn't she left for you to enjoy first, young Master Shin?" Just after this sentence, the nightmare began. Su Chan's body began to grow fiery red fox fur quickly, and she instantly turned into a fox spirit. It was ridiculous that Gongzi, who had spoken, had his head bitten off before he could react. Thinking of this, Shinyu couldn't help but shiver all over again. The memory of this night was too deep and terrible. All of this was so terrible that he didn't even dare to have the thought of revenge. He just wanted to hide far away and never see Su Chan, this terrible monster, again. Shinyu's hatred and anger were all unconsciously transferred to his father and mother. In his opinion, he did not have to be like this. It was all because his father and mother were not on his side that he had become like this. The more Shinyu thought about it, the more he felt that it was reasonable. The more he thought about it, the angrier he became. He gritted his teeth and couldn't help roaring, "Shinwankai Li Shaoxian, I won't let you go even if I become a ghost." Shinyu's roar echoed in the street and quickly attracted the attention of several people. A few gangsters shouted at him, "F***CK, what the hell are you shouting for?" Shinyu glared at them fiercely and wanted to do something, but there was a sharp pain coming from his broken arm. He immediately swallowed his anger. However, these gangsters refused to let him go. They walked slowly to Shinyu for a yellow-haired gangster whose head was dyed gold. Next to him stood a gangster with a mohawk. These people were none other than the gangsters who had tried to extort money from Li Jiandong's Desanxian store, but had been severely beaten up by Li Jiandong. When the yellow-haired man saw Shinyu covered in blood, he frowned and shouted in a low voice, "F***CK, it's so unlucky. Let's go. This guy is bleeding. Who knows what he did?" But just as they were about to turn their heads, Mohican saw Shinyu's leather shoes and exclaimed in a low voice, "Boss, it's Versace. It's an international famous brand." The yellow-haired man slapped him on the head and scolded, "What the F***CK? Do you even know Versace?" Mohican looked aggrieved. "Yes, how can I not know? My aunt specializes in making these imitations. With my sharp eyes, I can tell the real ones from the fake ones at a glance." This pair of Versace leather shoes is worth tens of thousands of yuan. The yellow-haired man's eyes suddenly lit up. Tens of thousands. He turned his head to look at Shinyu, as if he was looking at a golden man. He chuckled and waved his hand. "Brothers, take off his shoes for me." The gangsters around him immediately swarmed forward and took off Shinyu's shoes without saying a word. Shinyu panicked and shouted fiercely, "Do you know who I am? Stop or I'll kill you." The yellow-haired man and the gangsters looked at each other. The yellow-haired man had been in the underworld for a long time. At a glance, he could tell that Shinyu was definitely a son of a rich family. He hesitated for a moment, smiled, and asked doubtfully, "Who are you?" Shinyu subconsciously wanted to say that he was Shun Wansai's son and the only child of the Shun family. But as soon as he opened his mouth, he suddenly remembered Shun Wansai's heartless words. "From now on, you are no longer a member of the Shun family." Shinyu immediately swallowed his words and said fiercely, "It's none of your business who I am." The yellow-haired man immediately saw that Shinyu was pretending to be fierce. A fierce light flashed in his eyes, and he slapped Shinyu in the face and scolded angrily, "F***CK, how dare you put on airs in front of me? Brothers, strip him for me." The gangsters laughed and took off all the famous brands on Shinyu's body, not even leaving a pair of underwear. Mohican held Shinyu's underwear and said in surprise, "F***CK, this underwear is Armani. This pair of underwear costs more than 1,000 yuan. You are really a rich man." The yellow-haired man slapped Shinyu again and scolded, "F***CK, I can only afford to wear underwear that costs 10 yuan. How dare you wear underwear that costs 1,000 yuan? F***CK, I hate rich people putting on airs the most. Even their underwear has to be put on airs." At this time, Shinyu was so frightened that he shrank into a ball and shouted, "Help, help." The yellow-haired man immediately kicked him in the head and scolded, "F***CK, how dare you shout? I'll kill you if you shout again." Mohican smiled and shook the underwear in his hand, saying, "Boss, today's harvest is not small. Just this outfit alone. Even if it is sold as a second-hand item, it will be worth 5 figures. Another gangster pointed at Shinyu worriedly and said, "Hey boss, he seems to be dying. Look at him, his blood is almost drained." The yellow-haired man looked over and saw that Shinyu was frightened. After being tortured by them for a while, the blood from the wound was flowing more violently. He frowned. Mohican, who was beside him, came forward and whispered, "Boss, let's get out of here. It will be bad if the police see this. They will think that we cut him." The yellow-haired man glared at him and said, "Don't I know? Hurry up, go and find some waste paper." Although the gangsters didn't know what the yellow-haired man was going to do, they still quickly found a pile of waste newspapers. The yellow-haired man snorted and threw the waste newspapers in front of Shinyu. Then, he grabbed his broken arm and said with a grim smile, "You are lucky, boy. I am very kind today. I don't want to see anyone die in my territory." After that, he lit the newspaper with a lighter and said to the gangster beside him, "Go and hold him down and cover his mouth." After covering Shinyu, who was struggling wildly, the gangsters watched in horror as the flame in the yellow-haired man's hand approached Shinyu's broken arm little by little. With a hiss sound, Shinyu's broken arm was suddenly burned to a bloody mess, and a pungent smell of burning assaulted their nostrils. Ah! Shinyu suddenly let out a heart-wrenching scream of pain, but his screams were all muffled by someone's chest. He struggled wildly for a while, but soon exhausted all his strength. His vision went black and he fainted. After the yellow-haired man burned Shinyu's broken arm and stopped bleeding, he laughed, threw the newspaper aside, and winked at the gangsters. "Let's go." The gangsters were so scared by the scene that they almost vomited. They immediately stood up and ran away like wolves and rats. Only Mohican could hold on. He took tonight's spoils and was about to get into the shadows when he suddenly turned around and said to the yellow-haired man in a low voice, "Hey boss, do you think we should sell this guy to the beggar gang? We can still make a little money from the beggar gang." The yellow-haired man looked at Mohican in surprise. "Boy, you're good at business. Not bad. I'll send you to MBA for further study in the future." Mohican immediately smiled flatteringly and said, "Boss, you taught me well. As the saying goes, make use of waste." The yellow-haired man nodded, took out his mobile phone, and made a phone call. Then, he took his men to hide in the dark and stare at Shinyu. Before long, 2 middle-aged men dressed as beggars came to the street. One of them walked up to Shinyu, felt his pulse, and then rolled his eyelids. The other walked up to the yellow-haired man, bargained with him, and paid him 200 yuan. Then the yellow-haired man and his men laughed and disappeared without a trace. After looking around, the 2 young beggars quickly put a sack over Shinyu's head. Then, they carried the sack one after the other and disappeared into the shadows of the bustling city. Don't think too much about it. I have always hated the plot of The Return of the Condor Heroes. How can I write it myself? Don't worry, Su-chan is my darling. How can I let her be defiled? You think too much. My book won't have such a disgusting plot. Chapter 662. Not long after Shenyu was carried away, Su-chan slowly woke up from her coma. With the help of Zi Yuan, the little girl finally got rid of the heat poison in her body. When Zhou Qin and Zi Yuan came back, they took Su-chan directly to Zi Yuan's residence, which was opposite the residence of Li Yunyang and the others. At this time, the little foxes had also fallen asleep, and the elders of the Fox Zen school had also entered meditation to rest. Therefore, no one else knew that something big had happened. When Su-chan woke up, Zhou Qin, who had been waiting by her side, was overjoyed. "Su-chan, you're awake? Do you feel better?" Su-chan rubbed her temples and sat up with a blank face. She looked at Zhou Qin blankly, and then at Zi Yuan, who was next to her. She asked curiously, "Sister Zi Yuan, Sister Zhou Qin, why are you here?" Zi Yuan and Zhou Qin looked at each other. Zi Yuan said softly, "Su-chan, don't you remember?" Su-chan asked blankly, "Remember what?" Zhou Qin said cautiously, "Shenyu, that beast, wanted to do something to you. Don't you remember?" Su Chan blinked her eyes and tried hard to think about it. Then, she shook her head blankly and said, I don't remember. I just remember that I seemed to have eaten a midnight snack. And then I was poisoned. Then I felt like someone was carrying me away. Then I struggled. And I don't remember anything else. Zhou Qin looked at Ziyuan worriedly and whispered, Could it be? Ziyuan shook her head. No, Su Chan is still a virgin. I can see that. Zhou Qin breathed a sigh of relief and patted her chest. That's good. Otherwise, I really don't know how to explain it to Master. She said angrily. No, I thought about it. I can't let Xinyu, that bastard, get away with it so easily. I'll go and make trouble for him again. After that, Zhou Qin's figure flashed and she rushed out. Ziyuan couldn't stop her even if she wanted to, so she could only shake her head. She turned around and asked Su Chan tentatively, Su Chan, do you know that you showed your real body in the downtown area? Su Chan was so scared that her body trembled. She was shocked and cried out involuntarily. Ah, no way. Then. The little girl naturally knew how big of a disaster it was to show her true self in the downtown, and how much trouble it would cause for Li Yundong. She was so scared that she couldn't speak for a while. She grabbed Ziyuan's arm tremblingly, and looked at her eagerly, her eyes filled with fear. Yi, fortunately, Ziyuan smiled and said, Don't worry, we all arrived in time. Nothing happened. Only then did Su Chan breathe a sigh of relief. She patted her chest and said with a look of fear and relief, Thank God. Fortunately, I didn't cause trouble for Yundong. Ziyuan said, Are you going to find him? You were talking about him of you when you were in a coma. Su Chan hurriedly shook her head and said, No, don't cause trouble for him. It's so embarrassing to have such a thing happen. Ziyuan chuckled, only to see Zhou Qin suddenly appear in the room again. Ziyuan asked curiously, Why are you back again? Zhou Qin snorted angrily and said, This guy is lucky. He can't even be found. Ziyuan asked in confusion, How could he have disappeared? Xinyu shouldn't have been able to run far after losing his arm. Zhou Qin said, That's why I thought it was strange. I followed the bloodstains all the way from the Shin family, but I lost track of him when I reached a corner of an alley. Ziyuan thought for a while and said, Forget it. Don't think about him. Maybe he is not fated to die. Zhou Qin gritted her teeth and said, If you don't get rid of the roots, it will grow again in the spring wind. Since the Shen family doesn't care about him anymore, I won't let him go if I meet him one day. Zhou Qin had been born in the officialdom since she was a child, so she naturally knew the truth of getting rid of evil. When she was in the Shen family, she was too embarrassed to say this, but now she couldn't help it. Su Chan looked at Zhou Qin timidly and said in a low voice, Sister Zhou Qin, don't be angry. I'm not angry anymore. Zhou Qin glanced at Su Chan and shook her head. Su Chan, you are really a good person. Do you expect Xinyu to turn over a new leaf? Humph, I don't believe it. Don't worry about it. If I meet him one day, I will definitely take care of him. Su Chan saw that Zhou Qin's words were resolute and murderous. She was very moved and responded softly, Oh. The little girl didn't want the two of them to always talk about this matter, so she rolled her eyes and quickly said, By the way, if we don't protect Shin Wankai and the Shin family, what if the Japanese come to rob the Medicine King tripod at this time? What if other sects come to rob it? Zhou Qin couldn't help laughing. You little girl, you can't even protect yourself, but you still think about others. Don't worry, the other sects shouldn't come to rob it. Now that the matter of the Medicine King tripod has become so big, if they come to rob it again, it will be useless. As for the Japanese, Zhou Qin's face darkened and she said to Ziyuan, Yes, why haven't the Japanese come yet? Shouldn't they come to our country to find Master and the mystical silver fox immediately? Ziyuan pondered for a moment and said, I don't know. Maybe there is something wrong with the Japanese cultivation world. However, what I know is that the longer they delay, the better it will be for us. Su Chan couldn't help but look in the direction of Japan. For a moment she was a little worried. She whispered, If they really come, will it cause a war in the cultivation world? While Ziyuan, Su Chan, and Zhou Qin were whispering to each other in the small room, speculating about the current situation of the Japanese cultivation world. In the Yanli Temple of Mount Hai, Japan, an unprecedented gathering of the Japanese cultivation world was being held in a fierce and tense atmosphere. Yanli Temple, also known as Mount Hai Temple, was a large Taoist field standing on Mount Hai, the mother mountain of Japanese Buddhism. It was originally just a small grass hut. In 786 AD, that is, in the 4th year of the Japanese calendar, Master Zuicheng of the Tiantai sect set up a nunnery to preach in Mount Hai. In the 7th year of the calendar, he established the fundamental hall and placed the medicine Buddha statue that he had created with the supreme power of Buddhism. He also officially named the small grass hut Mount Hai Temple. After that, after more than 1,200 years of development, although Mount Hai had been devastated by war 3 times, and the mountain temple had been looted 3 times, the largest Buddhist Taoist field in Japan still survived tenaciously, and the Tiantai sect still stood to this day. Although the power of the Tiantai sect was not as great as before, it had been silently guarding the remnant soul of the mystical silver fox with the ape family for thousands of years, and had made indelible contributions to the Japanese cultivation world. Therefore, the Tiantai sect still enjoyed a high reputation in the Japanese cultivation world. Especially after Li Jiandong defeated Masako Tachibana, and the mystical silver fox escaped, the Japanese cultivation world originally wanted to sneak into the country quietly to find trouble with Li Jiandong. But at this time, something unexpected happened in Japan. On the day that Masako Tachibana was defeated by Li Jiandong, although there were many Japanese TV stations present at that time, the major cultivation sects still relied on their powerful background to suppress these reports. After all, there were some things that did not have the first video, and ordinary people did not see with their own eyes, so they would not believe it. But what they did not expect was that soon, a female host named Xiangtian of the Wakaima County TV station used the miniature camera on her chest to clearly record the whole process of the fight, and immediately uploaded it to the internet. Soon, the demon-sealing war near the Qingming Shrine in Kyoto, Japan, was also filmed by some passers-by with their mobile phones and uploaded to the internet. At this time, the whole Japanese internet world was boiling. Many young Japanese angrily logged on to the official websites of the major sects in the Japanese cultivation world and shouted abuse. The Japanese cultivators, who originally wanted to keep a low profile, were all angry. On the one hand, they tried their best to suppress these noisy voices. On the other hand, they knew that it was impossible for them to keep a low profile. Since they could not keep a low profile, the Japanese cultivators began to discuss how to carry out a righteous crusade. But this discussion was terrible. Almost every sect wanted to stand at the peak of the Japanese cultivation world as the leader and lead this crusade. Although the Japanese cultivation world had reached a consensus in a short period of time, if they wanted to unify the Japanese cultivation world, they had to first conquer the mystical silver fox. If they wanted to conquer the mystical silver fox, they had to first defeat Li Jiandong. But soon the problem came again. Who will lead the team to challenge Li Jiandong? Although this question was raised by a very inconspicuous sect, it immediately asked the most itchy place in everyone's heart. The Japanese people's strict hierarchy and desire for righteousness were unimaginable to outsiders. Even if it was a matter like conquering Li Jiandong, they had to distinguish who was superior. For a time, the Japanese cultivation world was quarreling. Many cultivation sects scolded each other across the air. The disciples of each sect even began to fight in private. The Japanese cultivation world was in a mess. Under such circumstances, the abbot of the Yanli Temple and the leader of the Tiantai sect, Imagawa Kagumo, took the initiative to hold the Japanese exorcism conference. Because Imagawa Kagumo's cultivation was extremely high, and he was highly respected. In addition, the Tiantai sect had a long history and was famous, so all the major cultivation sects came to attend the conference. On this day, in the lecture hall of the Jiguan courtyard of the East Tower of the Yanli Temple, 318 cultivation sects and thousands of cultivation masters of the Japanese cultivation world gathered together. The cultivators of various sects sat in the lecture hall in different clothes, arguing loudly with flushed faces. Be asterisk starred. How dare a small Desheng sect be so presumptuous? Why don't you take a piss and look at yourself? How dare you say that you want to lead the Japanese cultivation world? Huidong. Although our Desheng sect is small, we are not rats that can be bullied at will. Although the mystical silver fox is powerful, our Desheng sect also dares to twist its whiskers. Well said, Shixiang Huidong. This is the real man of our Desheng sect. How dare you? Do you think this is an ordinary thing? Do you think this is like eating and drinking? This is related to the safety and survival of our Japanese cultivation world. Now that the whereabouts of the mystical silver fox are unknown, she may come back at any time and take revenge on our Japanese cultivation world. How can you still be in the mood to argue about these issues here? Similar quarrels could be heard everywhere in the lecture hall. More than 300 sects, more than 1,000 people were quarreling. Some banged on the table, some banged on the floor. It was really like a pot of boiling water. Everywhere was tumbling. Imagawa Kagumo, the leader of the Tiantai sect, looked at the chaotic scene in front of him and couldn't help but sigh. He stood up, put his palms together, and said the name of Buddha. Amitabha, everyone calm down. Imagawa Kagumo's prestige was extremely high. Although his voice wasn't loud, everyone could hear him clearly. The huge lecture hall instantly quietened down. The Japanese cultivators who were sitting cross-legged on the floor all looked at him in unison. When Imagawa Kagumo saw that the crowd had finally quieted down, he said in a deep voice, "Everyone, what we are going to discuss now is who can lead our Japanese cultivation world to carry out this righteous crusade. But don't forget, every minute we argue here, the mystical silver fox will become stronger. As for Li Jiandong, he will not wait for us quietly. The way of cultivation is like sailing against the current. If you don't move forward, you will fall back. While we are arguing here, maybe he is making rapid progress, and making great progress." Imagawa Kagumo's words made everyone nod involuntarily. The middle-aged man of Ayase Shinto, Ayase Shinguang, said loudly, "Master Imagawa, we all understand what you said, but do you have any good suggestions? If not, with all due respect, I'm afraid that your words are reasonable, but of no use." Imagawa Kagumo looked around at the cultivation sects and said in a deep voice, "Everyone, I have a suggestion. What do you think?" The various sects were a little tired of arguing, and none of them were convinced by each other. At this time, seeing that Imagawa Kagumo was willing to stand up for them, they pretended to be generous and said, "Master Imagawa, go ahead. We are listening." Imagawa Kagumo nodded to the monks who were in charge of guarding outside the door. The monks immediately ran outside. Not long after, a burly man walked in. Imagawa Kagumo pointed at the man and said, "I suggest that he lead us to Hua to fight against Li Jiandong." Everyone's eyes immediately turned to look at the man. When they saw him, everyone was shocked. They exclaimed in unison, "How could it be him?" Moreover, there had been no war between the two countries in the past few decades. The cultivation world had also entered a period of peace. From time to time, many Japanese cultivators would go on a pilgrimage to the major cultivation sects in China to find their own cultivation sections. However, in such a peaceful environment, there were no fights between Japanese cultivators and Chinese cultivators. Everyone was speechless and did not know how to refute Imagawa Kagumo's words. Ayase Shinguang of Ayase Shinto whispered to Goddess Chuyen, "The Tiantai sect and the Shingon sect have formed an alliance." Chiyun's expression was indifferent, and her pair of extremely beautiful eyes were fixed on Imagawa Kagumo. The corners of her mouth were almost imperceptibly raised, revealing a trace of sarcasm. The Shingon sect suffered heavy losses in the last battle, and their status has plummeted. Many protectors of the Tiantai sect have been seriously injured in the Demon Sealing War. If the two don't join forces, they will definitely be squeezed to the bottom in this reshuffle of the cultivation world. Mount Koya and Mount Hai are the two sacred mountains of Japan. If the two join forces, Their momentum will be extraordinary. I'm afraid that the power of the Pure Land sect will be ranked behind them. Ayase Shinguang sighed and said, Yes, but I don't know who initiated this matter. Is it Imagawa Kagumo? Or Kaisai Hikaryoshi? The two of them whispered to each other for a while. Then they heard Imagawa Kagumo say, Everyone, I know what you are not convinced about, but Changsheng has been personally presided over by the great Mandala 5 tribes of the Vajra realm. It can be said that he has been reborn. Moreover, there is really no one who knows the situation of the Chinese cultivation world better than Changsheng. Before Imagawa Kagumo could finish his words, the surrounding Japanese people became excited and said angrily, No matter how powerful he is, so what? Isn't he still humiliated and defeated? Even if he knows the situation of the Chinese cultivation world, so what? It's not like none of us have been there. While everyone was cursing, Sayonji Tsunekatsu, who had been silent all this time, suddenly put his hands on his knees and shouted angrily, Everyone, please listen to me. Sayonji Tsunekatsu's roar shook the temple bell on High Mountain, and everyone's voices were suddenly suppressed by him. They all looked at Sayonji Tsunekatsu strangely, as if they couldn't understand how such a humiliated guy could still speak so confidently. The lecture hall was silent for a moment. Sayonji Tsunekatsu looked determined and said loudly in a sonorous voice, Everyone. Yes, I, Sayonji Tsunekatsu, am a sinner, a cultivator who suffers from shame and torture, but I swear to avenge these disgraces. Only by defeating my previous calamity, and defeating the devil, who once defeated me, can I advance bravely on the road of cultivation in the future. I know that although I have stood up again, I still need to face Li Jiandong and have a fair and square battle if I want to really stand up in spirit. I know that almost everyone here is stronger than me, but it is because of this that I stand up. The reason why I stand up is not because I desire the position of commander, but because I can't wait to wash away my shame. In my opinion, this is not the position of a commander, but the position of a vanguard official. I am asking you to let me be the vanguard official with the determination to die, to explore the road ahead for you. After that, Sayonji Tsunekatsu kowtowed heavily toward the field, and his forehead hit the floor with a dull sound. Please. Sayonji Tsunekatsu's words made everyone speechless for a while. They looked at each other one by one. Many people understood that Sayonji Tsunekatsu had replaced the position of commander with the vanguard official by stealing the concept. Although the name was different, the actual meaning was still very similar. Moreover, the other party was playing the emotional card. It was Yi Yuyu's turn. There was a long silence on the field. Ayase Shinguang suddenly asked, Tsunekatsu, do you have any plans to be the vanguard official? Sayonji Tsunekatsu straightened up and turned around in a kneeling position. He said loudly, Of course. Ayase Shinguang said, Tell me. Sayonji Tsunekatsu said, Please forgive me for being presumptuous. If you don't agree with me being the vanguard official, I can't say it. Everyone was furious. Just as they were about to scold him, they heard Ayase Shinguang laugh and say, When will we go out? Can you always say it? Sayonji Tsunekatsu hesitated for a moment, then said decisively, 15 days later. Everyone was shocked and angry. They couldn't help but curse, Bastard. 15 days? I don't know how strong the mystical silver fox will be in 15 days. Idiot, in 15 days. The soul of the mystical silver fox has already been collected by her. Ayase Shinguang narrowed his eyes slightly and asked, Tsunekatsu, can you tell us why you chose 15 days later? Sayonji Tsunekatsu couldn't help but look at Kaisai Hikaryuni, the great monk of Jinyin Tantrism, who was not far away. Kaisai Hikaryuni lowered his eyes and nodded slightly. Sayonji Tsunekatsu said, There are 4 reasons. First, in 15 days, it will be the inauguration ceremony of the head of the Linggong sect, the branch of the Taoist school, which is the most powerful Taoist force in the Chinese cultivation world. On this day, the cultivators of the Chinese cultivation world will gather together. As far as I know, there will be a conflict between the Jingyi school and Li Yundong, and we can take advantage of it. When the crowd heard this, there was a commotion. Bastard, Do we need to take advantage of this in the Japanese cultivation world? Sayonji Tsunekatsu did not show weakness and said loudly, "A lion needs to use all its strength to fight a rabbit. What's more, no matter how strong our Japanese cultivation world is, we are still going to China to fight. Without a plan, how can we guarantee a stable victory? This is a battle that we absolutely can't afford to lose." Everyone was suddenly speechless. Some of the people who opposed snorted angrily and stopped talking. With a smile on his face, Ayase Shingguang nodded to him and said, "Tsunekatsu, go on." Sayonji Tsunekatsu added, "Second, if we choose to go to the Chinese cultivation world on this day, we must choose the strongest and most elite cultivators of each sect. And each sect must be carefully selected and repeatedly considered. I think this will also take a lot of time." Ayase Shingguang nodded and said, "Go on." Sayonji Tsunekatsu added, "Third, since our Japanese cultivation world is going to move out collectively, it will inevitably attract the attention of the Chinese government. Therefore, we might as well go to China in the name of a friendly visit. In this way, we can not only deceive people, but also make it impossible for the Chinese cultivation world to avoid the war under the eyes of the world." When everyone heard this, they whispered to each other for a while. Many people began to be moved by the reason given by Sayonji Tsunekatsu, and nodded in agreement. Sayonji Tsunekatsu's heart shook when he saw this, and then he became more and more excited and said, "Fourth, our trip is not only to defeat Li Yundong, but also to deter the Chinese cultivation world, and let them be used by us to encircle the mystical silver fox. However, there are many factions in the Chinese cultivation world, and their roots and leaves are dense. If we visit them one by one, I believe it will take more time. Today, the Chinese cultivation world is gathered together, and it is the best time for us to fight them all." As soon as he finished speaking, there was a sudden uproar. Some cultivators said angrily in unison, "The mystical silver fox is in front of us. How dare you easily provoke a war with the Chinese cultivation world?" Sayonji Tsunekatsu seemed to have expected that someone would ask such a question. He said confidently in a loud voice, "The Chinese cultivators returned from the important place of our Japanese cultivation world with a great victory, and took advantage of this opportunity to release the mystical silver fox. This kind of behavior can be regarded as the beginning of the war. However, our Japanese cultivation world went to China with a peaceful and friendly heart to discuss with them the great plan of encircling and suppressing the mystical silver fox. If they don't agree, we will take advantage of the situation to defeat them, and then force them to work for us. Even if there are some who refuse to accept it, we can kill them and turn their powerful magical weapons into our own, so that when we face the mystical silver fox in the future, we will have a better chance of winning." Japan was located in a remote area, with narrow land and few resources, so the national character had a strong sense of crisis and aggression. When Sayonji Tsunekatsu said this, no one felt that there was something wrong. Instead, everyone nodded slightly in agreement. At this moment, many cultivators from cultivation sects said loudly, "Well, Changxing Jun, what you said makes sense. We agree with you as the vanguard." If there was a beginning, there would naturally be a response. The True Word sect and the Tiantai sect were originally two extremely powerful forces in the Japanese cultivation world, and there were many small factions attached to them under their wings. Therefore, as soon as they responded, it seemed that there was a general trend in the field. At this time, the Kumo family of the Inyang sect also stood up and echoed, "I agree." This time, it was as if a domino had been pushed down, and more sects responded. Ayase Shingguang and Chuyan looked at each other and shook their heads secretly. Ayase Shingguang put his hands in his sleeves and said to Sayonji Tsunekatsu with a faint smile, "Changxing Jun, I also agree. However, you must remember that you are just a vanguard." Sayonji Tsunekatsu was expressionless. He bowed heavily to Ayase Shingguang and said, "Changxing will remember it." Ayase Shingguang did not comment and nodded to Chuyan. "Let's go." After the two of them walked slowly out of the lecture hall, a voice came from behind them. "Shingguang Jun, please wait." Icy Xinguang and Qian both stopped and looked back. They saw two men wearing black tall hats and Yinyang robes standing behind them. They were Abe Yuri and the young patriarch of the Abe family. Icy Xinguang bowed respectfully to Abe Yuri and said, "Lord Abe, what's the matter?" Abe Yuri walked over to Icy Xinguang with a sullen face. He first politely saluted Qian, and then asked in a deep voice, "Xinguang Jun, how can you agree with such a ridiculous thing?" Icy Xinguang asked, "What's so ridiculous about it?" Abe Yuri said, "The Chinese cultivation world has a tradition and history of 5,000 years. Although it has declined in modern times, a centipede is still alive, and a thin camel is still bigger than a horse. In this battle, whoever dares to say that they will win is a madman. They are all crazy. Is it possible that a wise person like you, Xinguang Jun, will also be crazy with them?" Icy Xinguang sighed softly, pointed to the clouds in the sky, and said, "Lord Abe, look at the clouds in the sky. The reason why they are colorful and enviable is not because they are powerful, but because they know how to measure the situation according to the time. Wherever the wind blows, that's where they will float." This is the valuable experience that history has taught us for thousands of years. The Tiantai sect was powerful for a time, and there were thousands of martial monks under it. However, because they were too arrogant, they fought against Oda Nobunaga, and finally suffered a disaster. As he spoke, he recited in a melodious voice, "Misfortune is a blessing in disguise, and a blessing in disguise. If we lose this battle, it may not be a blessing. If we win this battle, it may not be a curse." Abe Yuri said anxiously, "But it is precisely because of this that we have to stop this stupid behavior." Icy Xinguang sighed and said, "If the general trend shows that the world is crazy, then what we can do is not to stop this madness, but to dance with the madmen. Otherwise, we will be abandoned to the corner of history, silent and then disappear. On this point, your Abe family should have a better understanding than us." Abe Yuri let out a long sigh and said helplessly, "Is there no other way?" Icy Xinguang shook his head and said, "The general trend. There is no other way. Lord Abe, prepare for war. Since you have chosen to fight, try your best to win." Abe Yuri looked gloomy, sighed heavily and stopped talking. Icy Shenko looked at the white clouds in the blue sky leisurely, his eyes lost in thought. After a long time, he suddenly smiled and said, "Lord Abe, what do you think? Li Yundong, who has been thrown into the teeth of the storm, is doing now." Abe Yuri's face was sullen, and he didn't speak. However, his son, who was not afraid of the tiger, said, "He must be hiding in fear." Icy Xinguang laughed out loud. A man who dares to go to a one-on-one swordsman meeting would not do such a thing. As he said that, he turned his face and looked at Qian with a smile. "What do you think?" A slight smile appeared on the corner of Qian's mouth, and he said lightly, "I'm looking forward to fighting with him." Chapter 664. Just as the Japanese cultivation world was rubbing their hands and eyeing them covetously, YZ. You soon, of course, it was only a vacation for Li Yundong. Poor Chris had been betrayed by Li Yundong without saying a word, so she had no choice but to agree to try shooting a TV series. Although Chris had never learned acting, she had acted in musical and dance dramas at school and had some stage experience. Moreover, Westerners were far more open than Easterners. With the help of other actors, Chris quickly got into the state of acting. But for Chris, filming a TV series was a very difficult thing, especially when the situation in front of her was not what she had expected. She had come here to learn cultivation, so why did she step into the film industry in such a muddle-headed manner? Chris, who was filming, forgot her situation for a moment and couldn't help looking at Li Yundong, who was lying on his back on the beach and sunbathing. Her eyes were full of sadness and indignation. "This bastard, he's free and easy, but I'm here suffering like this." Chris was so angry that her teeth itched. "Cut!" Director Song roared, and looked at Chris with an even more resentful gaze. "Miss Chris, where are you looking at?" Only then did Chris wake up and smile apologetically at the director. "Sorry, I was distracted." Director Song shook his head helplessly. Forget it, you've done a good job. I think we should stop here for today. Everyone take a break. The staff and actors of the film crew all cheered. Lou Fayer said to Chris with a smile, "What were you thinking about just now? You forgot your lines." Chris glanced at Lee Yun-dong and said, "I'm not thinking about anything." Lou Fayer glanced at Lee Yun-dong and said with a smile, "Are you thinking about your dream lover?" Chris quickly shook her head and said, No. He's just my." Lou Fayer quickly opened her eyes wide and asked, "He's your what?" Chris hesitated for a moment and said, "He's my registered master." Lou Fayer was surprised. "Ah, registered master? What did you learn from him?" Chris thought for a moment and shook her head. "You go ask him. It's not convenient for me to say." Lou Fayer pouted. You're still so mysterious. If you don't want to tell me, then forget it. I'll ask him myself." After that, she trotted all the way toward Lee Yun-dong. But when she was still 5 meters away from him, she slowed down. She rolled her eyes, quietly grabbed a handful of sand on the ground, and then quietly walked toward Lee Yun-dong with evil intentions. Almost there, but as soon as she came behind Lee Yun-dong and was about to throw the sand at him, she heard Lee Yun-dong say faintly without looking back, "Miss Lou Fayer, you're not young anymore. You shouldn't play such a prank, right?" Lou Fayer angrily threw away the sand in her hand and asked in confusion, "How did you know I was behind you?" Lee Yun-dong didn't open his eyes. He smiled and said, "Because your shadow is covering the sun above my head, I can feel it." Lou Fayer suddenly understood. "Oh, so that's how it is. I thought you had the ability to predict the future. Boring." Lee Yun-dong smiled and didn't say anything, as if he didn't want to talk about this kind of topic with a little girl like her. But even though he didn't want to say it, Lou Fayer was very enthusiastic. Like a curious baby, she kept asking Lee Yun-dong, "Hey, how did you do it last time? With a gentle push, you broke a hole in the wall of the hotel? Hey, are you even human? By the way, how did you do it last time when you were absorbing water in Desanxian? I've been wondering. Can you explain it to me? Hey, Chris said that you are her nominal master. What did you teach her? Is it kung fu? What kind of kung fu is it? Can you teach me too? Hey, you wouldn't rather teach a foreigner than me, would you? Hey, say something. You took her as your disciple because she was beautiful, didn't you? Hey, I'm not ugly either. Take me as your disciple too. Hey, I'm talking to you. Why are you ignoring me?" Lou Fayer asked like a barrage of 100,000 whys. But Lee Yun-dong remained indifferent. He didn't even look at her, and didn't say a word. Lou Fayer stamped her feet angrily and said, "You're so annoying. Why are you pretending to be cool?" She heard footsteps behind her. She turned her head, and saw Chow Kefi looking at them curiously. She smiled and said, "What are you talking about?" Lou Fayer suddenly acted as if she had seen a savior. She grabbed Chow Kefi's arm and said, "President Chow, look. This guy is so annoying. He only knows how to act cool and ignore me. He doesn't even answer me when I talk to him." Chow Kefi couldn't help laughing. She sat down next to Lee Yun-dong, patted him on the arm and said, "Hey, it's not polite of you. It's not like you." Lee Yun-dong opened his eyes helplessly and sighed. "President Chow, can't you see that I'm practicing?" "Practicing?" Chow Kefi and Lou Fayer exclaimed in unison. Lou Fayer giggled. "Are you practicing the sunbathing magic kung fu? Which level have you reached? Do you want me to teach you another kind of sunbathing kung fu?" Chow Kefi knew that Lee Yun-dong was not an ordinary person. She asked curiously, "You're lying here and basking in the sun." You soon Lee Yun-dong smiled slightly. "Then what do you think cultivation should be like?" Lou Fayer rushed to say, "Just like in the movies, you should at least sit cross-legged, right? If lying lazily and basking in the sun like you is called cultivation, then this kung fu is too easy to practice." Lee Yun-dong chuckled and said, "The way of cultivation starts with sitting and pole standing, which is what you call sitting cross-legged. But not all cultivation requires sitting cross-legged. Just like me now, you think I'm basking in the sun, but in fact..." Lee Yun-dong blinked at Lou Fayer and Chow Kefi, and said with a sly look in his eyes, "In fact, I'm absorbing the essence of the sun and the moon." "Humph." Lou Fayer immediately snorted. "Do you think you're the old demon of Black Mountain? Chow Kefi also chuckled, but after laughing for a while, her heart suddenly moved. For some reason, a question popped up in her mind. She asked, "Have you cultivated to the level where you can absorb the essence of the sun and the moon at any time?" When Li Yundong heard this, he was stunned. He suddenly sat up straight, turned his head, and looked at Chow Kefi with bright eyes. "How do you know?" Lu Feier interrupted. "Come on, you just said that you are absorbing the essence of the sun and the moon. Who doesn't know? I'm not deaf." Li Yundong shook his head, still staring at Chow Kefi, and said, "I mean, how do you know this is a kind of realm?" "President Chow, what kind of realm do you think it is?" Chow Kefi looked at Li Yundong blankly and shook her head. "How would I know? I just repeated what you said casually." Li Yundong stared at Chow Kefi for a long time. Seeing that she didn't seem to be lying, he stopped asking and continued to lie down. Lu Feier looked at him strangely and said, "You're really strange. You're so surprised when you talk." While she was talking, Chris also came over and looked at Li Yundong with a resentful expression. Lu Feier rolled her eyes and said with a smile, "Hey Chris, beg your master and ask him to accept me as a disciple." Chris looked at Lu Feier with even more resentment. "He still refuses to accept me as a formal disciple." Lu Feier was stunned for a moment. She patted Li Yundong on the shoulder and said, "Hey Li Yundong, there should be a limit to your arrogance, right? What on earth does Chris want to learn from you?" Li Yundong didn't even turn his head. "Ask her yourself." Chris saw Lu Feier looking at her curiously. She sighed softly and said, "I want to learn cultivation from my master." Lu Feier's eyes suddenly lit up. "Cultivation? It seems very mysterious and exciting." She poked Li Yundong's arm with her finger and said, "Hey, can you also teach me cultivation?" Li Yundong said leisurely, "Then answer me first. What is cultivation? Why do you want to cultivate?" Lu Feier said without hesitation, "Of course it's to cultivate like monks and Taoists. Cultivating all kinds of magic. Is this cultivation? Isn't that right?" Li Yundong shook his head. "You have a narrow view of cultivation." He turned his head and looked at Chris. "Chris, what do you think cultivation is?" Chris bit her lip, as if she was weighing her words. She hesitated for a long time before saying, "I think cultivation is the process of a person slowly becoming a person from an ordinary person through special training." Li Yundong laughed and said, "It's still an explanation with strong Western characteristics." Lu Feier said unconvinced, "Then what do you think cultivation is?" Li Yundong smiled, pointed at himself, pointed at Lu Feier, and then pointed at the staff who were busy in the studio not far away and said, "We are all cultivating." Lu Feier said with an unconvinced expression, "Humph, playing tricks. It's boring. If I were also cultivating, why didn't I see any special abilities?" Li Yundong smiled and said, "You're very good at acting. Isn't that a special ability?" Lu Feier smiled brightly and accepted all of Li Yundong's praise. "Thank you very much, but you're quibbling. It doesn't count." Li Yundong smiled and said, "No, I'm not quibbling." As he said this, Li Yundong pointed to the boundless blue sea and then to the vast sky, saying, "The world is so big, and each of us is so small. In the face of the power of heaven and earth, how can we become strong with such weak power?" Lu Feier, you also have your own strong points, especially in your professional field. You are much stronger than me. This is your way of cultivation. The art of cultivation isn't about cultivating some powerful power or special magic. Instead, it's about understanding the world around you and the people in the universe. Li Yundong said with a smile, "Lu Feier, you understand the knowledge of the film and television world. This is actually a part of the people in the universe, so I said that you are also a cultivator." Lu Feier blinked her eyes as if she understood and said, "What about you? Which part do you understand?" Li Yundong chuckled and put his hands on his arms. He closed his eyes and said to Chris, "Chris, do you understand what I just said? Go back and think about it. What kind of cultivation do you want to understand? Ask me when you've figured it out." Chris's eyes trembled slightly, and she looked a little confused. However, Chow Kefi, who was beside her, had a serious expression on her face, as if she had understood something. Lu Feier was about to speak, But she suddenly saw that the people on the beach had begun to run to the shore. She looked at the beach curiously and was shocked. Oh, the tide is rising? What a big wave. Let's go, let's go. The wave is coming. Chow Kefi and Chris looked at each other and quickly got up to run to the shore. After Lu Feier ran 10 meters away, she looked back and saw that Li Yundong was still lying lazily on the beach. She couldn't help shouting, "Hey, the wave is coming. Do you want to be swept away?" However, Li Yundong didn't seem to hear her and remained motionless. Lu Feier still wanted to shout, but she saw the wave rushing over in the blink of an eye and swallowing Li Yundong's figure in an instant. When the wave receded, he had already disappeared. Lu Feier was shocked. Oh no, he was swept away by the wave. Does he know how to swim? Hey, is anyone going to save him? She was about to turn her head and call for help when she suddenly saw Li Yundong standing beside her and looking at her with a smile. Lu Feier was shocked and said with her mouth agape, "Why are you here? Weren't you swept away by the wave?" Li Yundong laughed and said, "The universe of heaven and earth is a small universe of the human body. All the 5 elements in the world are for me to use. How could I be swept away by the wave?" After that, he turned around and left. Only Lu Feier, who was stunned, and Chris and Chow Kefi, who had already gotten used to it, were left behind. After the group returned to the hotel, Lu Feier tossed and turned in bed at night, thinking about what she had seen during the day. For a while she couldn't sleep. She tossed and turned for a while, and her heart couldn't help but feel very upset. She quietly got up, quietly opened Chow Kefi's room, and took a look inside. She saw that Chow Kefi was looking at the bright full moon outside the French window with bright eyes, muttering something in a low voice. Although her voice was soft, Lu Feier still heard her clearly. Chow Kefi was talking about nothing else but what Li Yundong had said during the day. The universe of heaven and earth is a small universe of the human body. All the 5 elements in the world are for me to use. As soon as Chow Kefi finished chanting, a ball of flame suddenly jumped out of her hand. Then, she muttered an incantation, and the flame in her hand quickly turned into a surging water ball. Then it turned into a rock, a piece of wood, and a metal weapon that kept changing shape. Chow Kefi didn't seem to notice the existence of Lu Feier. She seemed to be immersed in her own world. She whispered to herself and laughed. So that's how it is, that's how it is. Lu Feier, who was at the door, was stunned. For a moment, she looked at Chow Kefi in front of her, as if she were looking at a stranger. This beautiful businesswoman was skillfully playing with the 5 elements in her hand. There was a strange smile on her face, which looked particularly evil under the cold moonlight. Chapter 665. Lu Feier stared blankly at the scene in front of her and didn't move for a long time. It was as if she couldn't believe her eyes. Her whole body seemed to be immobilized. Her eyes widened and she thought to herself, when did Sister Chow become an immortal? How could she know magic? Just as she was puzzled, she suddenly saw Chow Kefi looking at her. The sharpness of her eyes was like a sharp sword, cutting into Lu Feier's heart. She trembled all over and subconsciously wanted to turn around and run away. But as soon as she turned around, she heard Chow Kefi shouting behind her. "Hey Feier, what are you doing?" Lu Feier heard Chow Kefi's gentle voice and doubtful tone. She turned her face and looked at her in surprise, only to see that Chow Kefi was looking at her strangely, as if she didn't understand why she ran away as soon as she saw her. Lu Feier pointed at Chow Kefi and said, "Sister Chow, you look so scary just now." Chow Kefi asked curiously, "What did I look like just now?" Lu Feier looked scared. "When you were playing magic just now, your smile was so scary." Chow Kefi was at a loss. "Was I playing magic just now?" "No. I was thinking about something else just now." Lu Feier's eyes widened. "I saw it with my own eyes. You can set fire to your hands, and then turn them into water and earth." Chow Kefi couldn't help laughing. "You little girl, you didn't sleep well last night. Are your eyes dazzled?" Lu Feier said loudly, "Impossible, I saw it clearly just now." Chow Kefi laughed, walked up to Lu Feier, and waved her hands in front of her. "Don't be silly. If my hands can set fire, Won't I become a monster? You must have been dazzled just now. You've been thinking too much about ghosts and gods recently, haven't you? Lu Feier saw that Chow Kefi was speaking with certainty, and it didn't seem like she was lying. Moreover, she really didn't believe that Chow Kefi could suddenly use magic overnight. Lu Feier thought for a moment with a suspicious look on her face and said, "Maybe. Am I really dazzled?" Chow Kefi took Lu Feier's hand with a smile and said, Have you been so tired recently that your eyes are dazzled? How could you see such a thing? Come sleep with me." Lu Feier was pulled to the spacious bed by Chow Kefi, and then she turned over and lay down. But after she lay down, she couldn't fall asleep. The image of Chow Kefi playing with the spell kept flashing in front of her eyes, but when she looked at Chow Kefi suspiciously, she saw that Chow Kefi had already fallen asleep. Her face was calm, and there was a slight smile on her lips, which was completely different from what she had seen before. Lu Feier was surprised for a moment and thought to herself, "Did I really see it wrong? Forget it, don't think about it anymore, sleep." But how could Lu Feier fall asleep? She kept thinking about this problem all night. She couldn't figure it out no matter how hard she thought about it. She stayed up until the early morning before she slowly fell asleep. At dawn the next day, Chow Kefi slapped her butt, and Lu Feier woke up in a daze. Chow Kefi smiled and said, "Lazy girl, the sun is shining on your butt. It's time to get up." Although Lu Feier had a childish personality and the temper of a spoiled young lady, she was very dedicated to her work. Although she was extremely sleepy, she still got up with sleepy eyes and staggered to the bathroom to wash up. After that, she simply tied up her hair, combed it into a fresh ponytail, and then followed Chow Kefi out of the door. After leaving the hotel, she saw that almost all the people of the film crew were at the entrance of the hotel. There was a large bus parked at the door, and the staff and actors of the film crew were also wearing very casual clothes, as if they were going out to play, not to shoot at all. Lu Feier couldn't help but ask curiously, "You're not shooting today?" A staff member of the crew shrugged his shoulders and said, "Director Song has something to do at home, so he won't be shooting for the next 3 days. We're going to a nearby scenic spot to play." Lu Feier immediately cried out bitterly, "Why didn't you say so earlier? Why didn't you tell me earlier? If I had known, I wouldn't have gotten up. I'm so sleepy." As she said this, she turned to Chow Kefi and smiled bitterly. "Sister Chow, can I not go? I'm so sleepy. I didn't sleep well last night, and my eye bags are about to come out." Chow Kefi laughed and scolded, "How old are you? You already have eye bags. No, you have to go. The place we're going to today is also our next shooting location." Lu Feier's face was very long. Just as she was about to act shamelessly, she saw Li Yundong standing not far away. Her heart's dream moved, and the sleepiness from before suddenly disappeared. She instantly jumped in front of Li Yundong, looked at him with a face full of hope, and asked, "Hey, immortally, can you teach me magic?" Li Yundong looked at her strangely. "Big star, big beauty, why are you suddenly asking me this?" Lu Feier had been a little familiar with Li Yundong these days. She casually grabbed Li Yundong's sleeve and said, "Hey, just tell me if you can do it or not." Li Yundong pointed to Chris, who was staring at him from afar, and said with a smile, "I haven't even taught her. How can I teach you?" Lu Feier glanced at Chris and secretly stuck out her tongue. She smiled and said, "Then can I ask you a few questions?" Li Yundong smiled and was about to speak when he heard the bus honking. A staff member shouted, "Hey, we're leaving. Everyone, get ready to get on the bus." Chow Kefi waved at Lu Feier not far away. "Hey Feier, are you coming?" Lu Feier quickly pulled Li Yundong's arm and said, "If he goes, I'll go. If he doesn't go, I won't go either." Chow Kefi quickly walked up to her and glared at her. "Are you crazy? Are you trying to create a scandal? Look around. Someone is looking at you." Only then did Lu Feier come to her senses. She made a face at Chow Kefi and quickly let go of her hand. She took out a pair of big sunglasses from her pocket and put them on. Then she looked at Li Yundong and said, "Hey, hurry up and say something." Li Yundong asked Chao Kefi. Where are you going? Chao Kefi said with a smile. We're going to Beefing in the nearby Anding County to pay our respects. Since we're in Haikou, we can't miss the nearby tourist attractions. Besides, we're going to shoot there in a few days, so we're going to do some scouting in advance. Li Yundong was stunned. Beefing? Is it the Beefing where Yuchan Palace, the ancestral court of Yuchan, one of the 5 ancestors of Jindan sect, is located? Chao Kefi and Lu Feier were both stunned. They looked at each other, and Chao Kefi said with a smile, I don't know what Jindan sect or the 5 ancestors of Nanzong you're talking about. I only know that it's one of the famous tourist attractions in Hainan. Lu Feier said to Li Yundong excitedly. Hey, you said you're not a god. Hey, what's Jindan sect and the 5 ancestors of Nanzong? Li Yundong didn't answer her question. He just nodded to Chao Kefi with a smile and said, Okay, I'll go and have a look. After that, he followed the crowd into the car. Lu Feier was a little unhappy when she saw that Li Yundong was ignoring her. She stomped her feet angrily, but soon she grabbed Chris and asked, Hey Chris, tell me honestly, is your master a god or not? Chris didn't dare to talk too much. She quickly waved her hand and began to play Tai Chi. You can ask him. Don't ask me. I can't answer you. After that, she quickly got into the car. Lu Feier's face was long, and she got into the car angrily. After she got in the car, she saw that no one dared to sit next to Li Yundong. She was suddenly happy. She quickly ran to Li Yundong's side, sat down angrily and said with a smile, I'm here again. Li Yundong didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Hey, if your fans see you like this, they'll kill me. Lu Feier said with a smile. Then answer me. Li Yundong was a little helpless because of her pestering, so he could only say, Okay, what do you want to know? Lu Feier was overjoyed and quickly asked, Are there gods in this world? Li Yundong said without hesitation, Yes. Lu Feier asked curiously, Really? But why haven't we seen them before? Li Yundong smiled and said, Which modern people believe in gods? Since no one believes in them, why would they show up? Lu Feier asked in confusion, But so many people believe in Christianity, but no one has seen Christ Jesus appear. Li Yundong said with a smile, How do you know? Besides, the beliefs of each sect are different. The belief of Buddhism is to be free and go to paradise. The belief of Christianity is to atone for sins and go to heaven. The belief of Taoism is to live forever and go to the 9 heavens immortal world. But no sect's doctrine is to cultivate in order to see the gods. So many people in the world want to see the gods, and they will see them one by one. Lu Feier said angrily, You're quibbling. No, show me some magic, or I won't believe you. Li Yundong smiled and said, If you don't believe me, then don't believe me. This kind of thing has always existed if you believe it, and it doesn't exist if you don't believe it. Lu Feier saw that her provocation didn't work, so she rolled her eyes and said, Then tell me, can magic be mastered in a day? Li Yundong laughed, pointed to himself and said, Then if I say that I can become a movie king in one day, do you believe me? Lu Feier said angrily, Don't make trouble. I'm serious. Li Yundong also said seriously, I'm also serious. Lu Feier asked tentatively, So you mean? No? Li Yundong couldn't help laughing. If you don't accumulate steps, you can't reach 1,000 miles. If you don't accumulate small streams, you can't form a river or a sea. Can Rome be built in one day? Lu Feier tilted her head and thought for a moment. She couldn't help glancing at Chao Kefi. She bit her lip gently and asked the question that had been bothering her the most. She asked, Hey, can you explain what magic is? Li Yundong looked at her strangely. Why do you want to know this? Lu Feier said, Oh, I'm just curious. I always feel that there are some things that can't be explained. I can't figure them out no matter how hard I try. It feels strange and uncomfortable. I can't even sleep well. Li Yundong smiled. He didn't want to talk to her about these things, but he suddenly saw from the corner of his eye that Chris, who was sitting on the other side, was looking at him seriously and eagerly. Her eyes were full of a strong desire for knowledge. Her expression and gaze instantly made Li Yundong's heart skip a beat. He thought to himself, I pulled this girl out of school, asked her to star in a TV show without her consent, and then ignored her. That doesn't seem to be very good, does it? Thinking of this, Lee Yundong smiled and didn't answer Lu Feier's question. Instead, he said to Chris with a smile, "Chris, do you know why the skin of Western women is generally thicker than that of Eastern women?" This question made Chris a little hesitant. She looked at Lu Feier's snow-white and delicate skin, and a look of envy flashed across her eyes. She shook her head and said, "I don't know." Lu Feier tugged at Li Yundong's arm unwillingly. "Hey, I asked you a question. Why did you change the subject?" Li Yundong smiled and said, "I didn't change the subject. I was just answering your question." Lu Feier said unhappily, "Do you think I'm a fool?" What does it have to do with magic cultivation, whether the pores of Western women or Eastern women are thicker or thinner? Li Yundong laughed and said, "Of course it has a lot to do with it." Li Yundong's words not only made Chris and Lu Feier widen their eyes, but also the other people in the car looked at Li Yundong. They thought to themselves, the size of a person's pores has anything to do with magic cultivation? Isn't this person too good at talking nonsense? Some male actors who couldn't stand Li Yundong's good luck with women looked at Li Yundong with a faint smile and thought to themselves, "Bluff, let's see how you bluff." You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Sword of Destiny YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support. And don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.